Vivian Harper stood at the center of the grand ballroom, her golden gown catching the light of the cascading crystal chandeliers. The room brimmed with polished faces and practiced smiles, a sea of socialites and philanthropists who had gathered for her latest charity gala. From her perch near the dais, Vivian exuded confidence. She was the face of Harper Foundation, a beacon of generosity in the city, admired for her ability to balance wealth and benevolence with enviable poise. Tonight was no exception. Her presence was magnetic, drawing whispers and compliments from every corner of the room. In the shadows of this glamorous tableau, Eliza Parker worked quietly, a damp cloth in her hand and a determination to stay unnoticed etched into her movements. She maneuvered through the crowd, wiping down smudged surfaces and retrieving empty glasses, her uniform as inconspicuous as she wished to be. The event was a job, and jobs meant survival, a truth Eliza knew too well. Her world was a far cry from the gleaming floors and opulent centerpieces surrounding her. Her reality consisted of rent-due dates, a sick younger brother who depended on her, and an endless cycle of minimum wage work. As Vivian raised her glass to toast the evening's success, she caught a glimpse of Eliza. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Vivian's brow furrowed in brief curiosity, her polished veneer momentarily breaking. Eliza, startled by the unexpected attention, looked away and returned to her task. It was just a second, but it felt like a spark crossing two worlds that were never meant to touch. The murmurs of admiration around Vivian swelled as she began her speech, extolling the Foundation's achievements in providing scholarships and healthcare for underprivileged children. Her voice carried warmth and authority, captivating the audience. Yet, as she spoke of gratitude and giving back, Eliza couldn't ignore the irony that settled heavily in her chest. These words were meant to uplift people like her, weren't they? And yet, here she was, invisible among the very crowd celebrating compassion. During the speech, Vivian stepped down from the dais and began mingling with guests. Her diamond bracelet caught the light as she gestured animatedly, her laughter like a soft chime. A group of admirers surrounded her, and she thrived in their company, basking in their adoration. At one point, she leaned toward a young woman complimenting the event and quipped, "It's a pleasure to give back. It reminds us all to appreciate the little things, like a clean table or an orderly room." Her words were light, meant to charm, but they reached Eliza's ears like an unintentional barb. Eliza froze, her grip tightening on the tray she carried. A flush of shame and anger washed over her, even as she reminded herself it wasn't personal. But how could it not be? In her mind, Vivian's words echoed louder than the applause in the room, highlighting every disparity she lived with. The evening wore on, and the contrast between the lives of the two women became sharper with every passing moment. Vivian glided effortlessly from one conversation to another, her laughter ringing out amidst the clinking of champagne glasses. Eliza, meanwhile, continued her work, her head low, her shoulders aching. Yet she couldn't shake the sting of that remark, nor the sense of humiliation it had left behind. In a rare pause, Eliza stepped outside to catch her breath. The night air was crisp, offering a stark contrast to the stifling warmth of the ballroom. She leaned against the cool stone wall, closing her eyes to ward off the tide of emotions threatening to spill over. She thought of her brother, Liam, who waited for her at home, his frail frame curled up on their worn couch. This job, as demeaning as it sometimes felt, paid for his medicine and kept the electricity on. Inside, Vivian was approached by Clara, her sharp-eyed assistant, who handed her a tablet showing the latest fundraising numbers. Vivian nodded approvingly, but felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Her interaction with Eliza earlier in the night lingered at the edges of her mind, uninvited but persistent. She dismissed it quickly, focusing instead on the glow of the event's success. By the end of the evening, Vivian was exhausted but triumphant. The gala had raised an impressive sum, and as she bade farewell to her guests, her smile was genuine. Yet, as she climbed into the back seat of her sleek black car, she glanced at her reflection in the window. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it was about the girl with the tray that had unsettled her. Back in the now empty ballroom, Eliza finished her work. She stacked the last of the chairs and wiped down the tables, her body aching and her mind replaying the evening in relentless loops. She couldn't erase the image of Vivian's effortless grace, nor the offhand comment that had laid bare the chasm between their worlds. As she exited through the service door and stepped into the quiet street, Eliza felt the weight of the night settle fully upon her. In her pocket, she clutched the crumpled envelope containing her week's wages, a lifeline she couldn't afford to lose. Despite the indignities, she reminded herself that she was strong, that she had survived worse. But as she walked away, the shadow of the gala lingered, pulling at her thoughts. Somewhere in her mind, a question began to take root, a question that neither Vivian nor Eliza could yet answer. What happens when two lives so starkly different are forced to collide? The morning after the gala began with an air of triumph for Vivian Harper, seated in her expansive kitchen, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She sipped her artisanal coffee while scanning the headlines. The gala had been a resounding success, its achievements plastered across the society pages. Pictures of Vivian smiling gracefully, a glass of champagne in hand, dominated the coverage. She leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a rare moment of satisfaction. Clara, always efficient, appeared at her side with a tablet, already organizing the follow-up initiatives. "The team reports excellent feedback from last night," Clara noted briskly, her tone clipped but approving. "Donors are thrilled. We surpassed projections by 20%. Vivian nodded, her mind momentarily flashing to the face of the young woman she'd noticed last night, the one with the tray. She'd dismissed the thought then, chalking it up to the fleeting exhaustion of hosting. But now it edged back, unbidden. "Make sure the staff receives acknowledgement for their hard work," she said, her voice measured. Clara raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the comment, but too professional to question it outright. "I'll see to it." Meanwhile, in a cramped apartment across the city, Eliza Parker stirred a weak cup of coffee while her brother Liam dozed fitfully on the couch. The clatter of spoons against ceramic punctuated the quiet morning, and Eliza's movements were precise, almost robotic. The gala's events replayed in her mind like a reel she couldn't pause. Vivian's offhand comment echoed louder than the chirping birds outside the window. "Did the job pay okay?" Liam asked groggily, breaking her reverie. His voice was hoarse, a reminder of the medication they couldn't afford to skip. "It was fine," Eliza replied, forcing a smile. "We're covered for another week." The day wore on, and as the sun began its descent, the staff from the previous night's gala gathered to wrap up and retrieve any forgotten items. Eliza was among them, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. She moved through the now empty ballroom, collecting stray napkins and tidying chairs, avoiding eye contact with her colleagues. Her aim was simple: finish quickly and leave without incident. But fate had other plans. The commotion began when a sharp cry echoed through the room. Heads turned to see one of the event organizers, an impeccably dressed man named Gregory, holding an empty pedestal where a piece of rare art had been displayed the night before. His face was a mask of panic. "The sculpture!" Gregory exclaimed. "It's gone!" Clara, who had arrived to supervise the post-event cleanup, rushed forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. "What do you mean it's gone?" she demanded, her voice icy. The staff froze as Clara's gaze swept across them, her suspicion palpable. Vivian, who had arrived minutes earlier to retrieve a misplaced item of her own, now stood at the entrance, observing the scene with growing concern. "It was there last night," Gregory insisted, gesturing frantically. "It's worth over $100,000. Whispers rippled through the small crowd, uncertainty giving way to fear. Eliza stood rooted to the spot, gripping the cloth in her hands so tightly her knuckles turned white. She glanced around, noticing the way Clara's eyes narrowed as they landed on her. "We'll search the premises," Clara declared, her tone firm. "Nobody leaves until we find it." The next hour was a blur of frantic searching, punctuated by murmurs and sharp instructions. Tension thickened the air as the workers combed through the venue under Clara's hawk-like scrutiny. Eliza moved mechanically, her mind racing. This wasn't the first time she'd been in a room where an accusation hovered like a dark cloud, and she knew too well how such situations often played out. Finally, Clara turned to Vivian, her voice lowered but deliberate. "Perhaps we should ask some direct questions. It's possible someone on the staff saw something." Vivian hesitated, glancing at the group of workers who had gathered near the far end of the room. Her polished demeanor remained intact, but an undercurrent of discomfort flickered across her face. Then, with an air of reluctant authority, she addressed them. "We need to get to the bottom of this," she said, her voice steady. "If anyone knows anything, now is the time to speak up." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara's gaze landed on Eliza, and a pointed question sliced through the room. "You were near that pedestal several times last night, weren't you?" All eyes turned to Eliza. Her heart pounded as the weight of accusation settled on her. She met Clara's gaze head-on, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. "I was cleaning," she replied evenly, "like I was supposed to." "And you didn't see anything unusual?" Clara pressed, her tone sharp. "No," Eliza answered, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. Before Clara could respond, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me, but isn't this a bit premature?" Mark, a young journalist who had attended the gala as a guest and lingered to follow up on a story, stepped forward. His tone was measured, but there was a hint of challenge in his words. "Do we even know the sculpture was stolen? It could have been misplaced." Vivian looked at Mark, her expression unreadable. "You're suggesting we wait and do nothing?" "I'm suggesting we don't jump to conclusions," Mark said, glancing meaningfully at Clara. Before the tension could escalate further, Gregory shouted from the far side of the room, "I found it!" He held the missing sculpture aloft, triumphantly and sheepishly all at once. It was tucked under the tablecloth here. The room exhaled collectively, relief sweeping through the group. Eliza closed her eyes briefly, the adrenaline draining from her limbs, but the moment of reprieve was short-lived. Though the crisis had been resolved, the sting of Clara's pointed suspicion lingered, and Vivian's silence during the ordeal left an impression Eliza couldn't shake. As the workers dispersed, Eliza caught sight of Mark, watching her thoughtfully. He gave her a small nod, as if to say he'd noticed what others had missed. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like the faintest glimmer of validation. Vivian, on the other hand, left the ballroom with her thoughts tangled. The incident had shaken her in ways she didn't fully understand, and for reasons she wasn't ready to confront. Eliza sat on the worn couch in her small apartment, staring blankly at the muted television. Liam was dozing beside her, his labored breathing filling the quiet room. The morning light filtering through the frayed curtains only emphasized the peeling paint on the walls and the threadbare carpet beneath her feet. She clenched her hands into fists, her mind replaying the scene from the night before. Clara's sharp gaze, the weight of the accusations, and Vivian Harper's detached silence. She had expected the job to be hard, like all the others, but she hadn't anticipated being singled out and humiliated. The memory of Clara's words burned in her mind, each one a reminder of how easily someone like her could become the scapegoat in a world where wealth and power ruled. Liam stirred, his voice groggy. "You're quiet today." Eliza blinked, pulling herself from her thoughts. "Just tired," she replied, brushing a hand through his hair. "How are you feeling?" "Same," he said with a small shrug. "You don't have to keep worrying, you know. We'll get through this." She nodded but didn't respond. Liam always tried to put on a brave face, but Eliza knew the truth. His health was a fragile thread, and the weight of their survival rested squarely on her shoulders. She glanced at the clock and sighed. Her shift at another cleaning job started soon, but her chest felt heavy with the thought of facing another day. Meanwhile, across town in her luxurious penthouse, Vivian Harper sat at her desk, scrolling through reports. Her assistant, Clara, hovered nearby, offering updates and reminders about the Foundation's next big event. Vivian listened distractedly. Her mind tugged back to the previous evening. She had seen the look on the young cleaner's face. Eliza, Clara had said her name was. A flash of humiliation and anger, quickly masked, but not before it left an imprint on Vivian's memory. "Vivian!" Clara's voice broke through her thoughts. "Did you hear me?" Vivian blinked and set the tablet down. "Yes, of course. The gala was a success, and we need to keep the momentum going." Clara hesitated before speaking. "I also wanted to mention the girl from last night, Eliza. Do you think we should review her employment? I mean, the sculpture incident wasn't her fault, but it might be better to—" "No," Vivian interrupted, her tone sharper than she intended. "There's no need for that. Let's focus on more pressing matters." Clara's eyebrows lifted slightly, but she nodded. "As you wish." Vivian waved her off, returning to her reports, but she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. She prided herself on her image as a philanthropist, someone who cared deeply about the less fortunate. Yet her silence during the accusation lingered like a stain, one she couldn't ignore. It wasn't like her to remain passive, was it? Or had she become so accustomed to the roles of wealth and power that she no longer questioned them? Eliza, meanwhile, trudged through her day, the hours blending into one another. By evening, she found herself at the small diner near her apartment, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. She stared out the window, watching cars blur by, her mind drifting to the growing unease she felt about her life. The weight of it all was suffocating. "You always this deep in thought, or is it just today?" A voice broke her trance. She turned to see Mark, the journalist from the gala, standing with a curious smile. He held a cup of coffee, his tie slightly askew. Eliza hesitated before responding, "I'm just tired." Mark gestured to the seat across from her. "Mind if I join?" She shrugged, and he slid into the booth. "I wanted to say," he began, his tone careful. "I'm sorry about what happened last night. It wasn't fair." Eliza stiffened. "You don't have to apologize. It's not like you were the one pointing fingers." "No, but I didn't speak up soon enough either," he admitted. "I saw what was happening, and I hesitated. That's on me." She studied him, searching for insincerity, but found none. "Why does it matter to you? People like me, we're used to this kind of thing." "That doesn't mean it's right," Mark said simply. "And I don't think you're the kind of person who just accepts it." Eliza snorted softly. "You don't know me." "Not yet," he conceded. "But I'd like to." The openness in his voice caught her off guard. She wasn't used to being seen, truly seen, by anyone outside her small circle. It was both unnerving and strangely comforting. "Why are you here, really?" she asked, her tone skeptical. Mark leaned back, his expression thoughtful. because I think there's more to this story than anyone's saying. And maybe, if you're willing, you can help me tell it." Eliza's guard went up immediately. "You want to use me for some article?" "Not use," he corrected gently. "Partner. Your voice matters. Eliza, people need to hear it." She shook her head, her emotions a whirlwind. "I don't know if I can trust you." Mark nodded, respecting her hesitation. "I get that, but if you ever change your mind, you know where to find me." He slid a business card across the table before standing. "Take care, Eliza." She watched him leave, the card sitting untouched beside her coffee. For the first time in a long time, the idea of speaking out didn't feel entirely impossible, but the risk, it was enormous. As night fell, both women lay awake in their respective worlds, grappling with the choices before them. For Vivian, it was a growing unease about her complicity in a system she claimed to want to change. For Eliza, it was the question of whether she could risk everything to challenge that same system. Their paths, though separated by wealth and privilege, were beginning to converge in ways neither could yet imagine. Eliza stood outside the towering glass building of her cleaning agency, her fingers tightening around the strap of her worn canvas bag. She hadn't planned to come in today, but a summons from her supervisor had left her with little choice. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as the receptionist gestured toward a narrow hallway leading to the manager's office. The door creaked open, and her supervisor, Mr. Grayson, looked up from his cluttered desk. His expression was unreadable, though the lines on his face hinted at a weariness born of long days and difficult conversations. "Eliza, sit down," he said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. She obeyed, her back straight and her hands resting tensely on her lap. "You wanted to see me," Grayson sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, about the gala. I received some feedback from the event organizer." Eliza's stomach tightened. She braced herself for the worst. What kind of feedback? "They were concerned about the incident with the missing sculpture," he began, his tone measured but firm. "Now, I know it wasn't your fault, but the perception of these things matters in our line of work." "Perception," she repeated, her voice tinged with indignation. "The sculpture wasn't stolen, it was misplaced, and they found it." Grayson raised a hand to silence her. "I understand that, but events like this are about optics. They're high-profile clients, and their impression of us affects future contracts." "So, what does that mean for me?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. "I'm not firing you," he said quickly, "but they specifically requested that you not be assigned to their events again." Eliza felt a rush of anger and humiliation. "They requested that. Was it Clara or Vivian Harper?" Grayson shrugged. "Does it matter? Look, Eliza, you're a good worker, but these kinds of situations stick. My hands are tied." She bit her lip, suppressing a retort. "This wasn't just about the gala. It was about the ease with which people like Vivian Harper could tarnish someone else's reputation without even trying, without even noticing." "Fine," Eliza said finally, rising from the chair. "Is that all?" Grayson hesitated, as though debating whether to say more. "Just keep your head down for a while, okay? Things like this have a way of blowing over." Eliza left the office with her head held high, though the weight in her chest felt unbearable. The world outside seemed grayer than usual as she stepped onto the busy sidewalk. Her pride told her to quit, but her responsibilities, to Liam, to herself, tied her to this thankless job. Meanwhile, Vivian paced the polished floors of her penthouse, the sunlight catching the crystals in the chandelier above. Clara sat on the edge of the sofa, her tablet balanced on her lap as she updated Vivian on the latest developments with the foundation. "You seem distracted," Clara noted, glancing up. Vivian paused mid-step. "Do you think I handled the situation with the cleaner appropriately?" Clara frowned. Eliza. Why are you still thinking about that? It doesn't sit right with me, Vivian admitted, folding her arms. She was unfairly accused. Clara tilted her head, clearly puzzled. With all due respect, Vivian, it was a minor misunderstanding. Let's not dwell on it. Vivian stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her. It wasn't minor for her. Clara's silence was telling. She adjusted her posture and said, "You've worked hard to build your reputation, Vivian. Don't let guilt over someone like her distract you from the bigger picture." Vivian turned, her gaze sharp. Someone like her. Clara blinked, then gave a faint smile. "I meant someone who's not part of this world. You can't change everything." Vivian didn't respond, but Clara's words gnawed at her. She had built her life around charity and philanthropy, yet in one evening she had felt the cracks in the facade. The cleaner's face, her defiance and vulnerability, lingered like an unspoken accusation. Elsewhere, Eliza found herself at the small park near her apartment, sitting on a worn wooden bench. She clutched Mark's card in her hand, turning it over repeatedly. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to forget the strange journalist who had seen too much of her pain. But another part, a quieter, braver part, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The soft crunch of footsteps on gravel broke her reverie. She looked up to see Mark approaching, his hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. "I wasn't sure if you'd actually call," he said, stopping a few feet away. "I didn't," Eliza replied, holding up the card. "But here you are." He smiled slightly, nodding toward the bench. "May I?" She hesitated, then gestured for him to sit. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. "I heard about what happened with your supervisor," Mark said finally, his tone careful. Eliza looked at him sharply. "How do you know?" "I have sources," he replied cryptically, then softened. "Look, I'm not here to pry. I just want to help. Tell me your side of the story." She hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, but the urge to unburden herself won out. Slowly, haltingly, she began to recount the events of the gala and the fallout that followed. Mark listened intently, his expression never wavering. When she finished, he said, "You've been treated unfairly. People need to hear this." Eliza shook her head. "And then what? They read it, maybe feel bad for a second and move on. It doesn't change anything." "It could," Mark countered. "But only if you're willing to take the risk." She studied him, searching for any hint of ulterior motive, but found none. For the first time, she considered the possibility that speaking out might not just be for her, it might mean something more. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Mark nodded. "That's all I ask." As he left, Eliza remained on the bench, the card still in her hand. Choices weighed heavily on her, each one carrying the potential to shift her life in ways she couldn't predict. And though she didn't know it yet, Vivian Harper was beginning to grapple with her own choices that would soon force their paths to cross again. Eliza stood in the cramped kitchen of her apartment, staring at the crumpled piece of paper in her hand. It wasn't much, just Mark's business card, with his name and number printed in tidy black letters, but it seemed to weigh more than it should. She glanced at Liam, who was sprawled on the couch, a blanket pulled up to his chest. His shallow breaths and pale complexion were a constant reminder of why she couldn't afford to take risks. And yet, something inside her was shifting, restless against the weight of resignation. "Do you think it's crazy to trust someone you barely know?" she asked, breaking the silence. Liam cracked open one eye and smirked faintly. "Crazy, sure, but sometimes crazy's all you've got left." She frowned. "That's not helpful." He shrugged, coughing lightly. You're asking the wrong guy. I just sit here and watch reruns all day. You're the one out there dealing with whatever this is." Eliza huffed, tucking the card into her pocket. "I'm going for a walk." "Bring back something sweet," Liam called after her. "I'm tired of the salty stuff." She stepped out into the cool evening air, her thoughts tangled. The streets were alive with the hum of traffic and the chatter of pedestrians, but Eliza moved through it all as if in a bubble. The idea of talking to Mark again both terrified and intrigued her. What if he really could help? What if he couldn't? Worse, what if she told her story and nothing changed? She stopped at a small cafe, one she rarely entered but often passed. The bell above the door jingled softly as she stepped inside. To her surprise, Mark was there, hunched over a notebook with a steaming mug of coffee at his side. He looked up, startled at first, then smiled. "Fate, or did you finally decide to call?" he asked. Eliza hesitated before sliding into the seat across from him. "I didn't call, but I guess I'm here." "Good enough for me," Mark said, closing his notebook. "Coffee?" She shook her head. "No, thanks." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Mark seemed content to wait, his gaze steady but unassuming. Finally, Eliza exhaled sharply. "If I do this, if I talk to you, I need to know it's not just some article for you." "It's not," Mark assured her. "I mean, yes, I'm a journalist, but I don't just want a story. I want to shed light on something bigger. People like you, your experiences, they matter." She studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. His earnestness felt genuine, but trust didn't come easily. "You say that now? What happens when my story gets buried under the next big headline?" Mark leaned forward, his tone quiet but firm. "That's not going to happen. I'll make sure it doesn't." Eliza stared at him, then sighed. "I don't even know where to start." Mark smiled softly. "Start wherever it feels right." As she began to talk, her words were slow at first, halting, as if she were testing the waters. But as the minutes passed, the dam broke. She spoke of long nights spent cleaning rooms that others dirtied without thought, of the weight of caring for Liam, of the constant, gnawing fear that one wrong step could cost her everything. Mark listened without interruption, his pen moving occasionally across the page, but his eyes never leaving hers. When she finally finished, her throat felt raw, her chest tight. "So there it is," she said, leaning back. "Not exactly groundbreaking." Mark shook his head. "It's more than you think. People need to hear this, Eliza. They need to understand." Eliza scoffed lightly. "Understand what? That some rich people treat us like dirt?" "Newsflash, they already know." "But they don't see it," Mark countered. "Not like this, not with your voice. That's what makes it different." She looked away, the fear creeping back in. "What if I lose my job? Or worse?" Mark's voice softened. "I can't promise there won't be risks, but I can promise I'll stand with you through it." His words lingered. And for the first time, Eliza felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Hope. Vivian Harper stared at the letter in her hands, her brow furrowed. It had arrived that morning, unmarked and unsigned, delivered by courier. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a message that chilled her. "Your charity is a facade. People are starting to notice." She folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. Clara had assured her the Foundation's reputation was untouchable, but this message suggested otherwise. Vivian thought back to Eliza, to the look of betrayal in the cleaner's eyes at the gala. Could that moment have been the catalyst for something larger? Clara entered the room, her heels clicking against the polished floors. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, she said briskly. "Everything okay?" Vivian hesitated. "I received an anonymous letter," Clara frowned. "A threat?" "Not exactly," Vivian replied, holding up the letter. "But it's concerning." Clara scanned it quickly and scoffed. "Probably just someone trying to rattle you. Ignore it. Vivian wasn't so sure. What if it's more than that? What if people really are starting to question us? Clara waved her hand dismissively. You've built this foundation from the ground up, Vivian. No one can touch that. But the unease in Vivian's chest refused to fade. As she prepared for the meeting, a new thought took root, one she wasn't ready to voice. What if the letter wasn't a threat, but a warning? Eliza returned home that night, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. Liam looked up from the couch, grinning at the box of pastries she handed him. You actually listened to me for once, he teased. She smiled faintly, sitting beside him. As Liam dug into the sweets, Eliza felt the card in her pocket, its edges worn from her fingers, tracing them over and over. For the first time in years, she felt a sliver of control over her own story. And though fear still loomed, something stronger began to take its place. Determination. Eliza walked through the narrow corridor of her apartment building, her footsteps echoing faintly off the cracked walls. She held her phone tightly, rereading Mark's text message for the third time. I think you'll want to meet her. Ruth might have something you need to hear. Meet us at the community center at 6. The name Ruth didn't ring a bell, but curiosity tugged at her. She paused outside Liam's room, peeking in to check on him. He was asleep, his breathing more even than usual. She felt a flicker of relief. At least tonight, she could leave without guilt weighing too heavily. The community center was only a few blocks away, a modest brick building wedged between a laundromat and a shuttered convenience store. Inside, the air smelled faintly of chalk and floor cleaner, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Mark greeted her at the entrance, his smile warm but subdued. You made it, he said, motioning her inside. Eliza shoved her hands into her jacket pockets. I'm not sure why I'm here. You will be, Mark replied. Ruth's in the back room. Eliza followed him through a hallway lined with faded flyers, advertising free meals and job fairs. They entered a small meeting room where an older woman sat at a table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Her silver hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her eyes, sharp and kind, studied Eliza with quiet curiosity. Eliza, this is Ruth, Mark said, pulling out a chair for her. Eliza hesitated before sitting, her gaze flicking to Ruth. You're Mark's source. In a way, Ruth replied, her voice steady but warm, though I prefer to think of myself as someone who's seen a lot and learned a little. Mark excused himself, leaving the two women alone. Eliza felt the weight of Ruth's gaze, as if the older woman could see straight through her. Mark told me about you, Ruth began, her words measured. Said you're thinking about speaking out. Eliza stiffened. Thinking is all I'm doing right now? That's fair, Ruth said, nodding. It's not an easy thing to do. Eliza leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You sound like you've done it before. I have, Ruth said simply. Years ago, I worked as a cleaner too, back when unions were stronger and the stakes were different. But the fear, that part hasn't changed. Eliza frowned. What happened? Ruth sipped her tea before answering. I saw something wrong and decided not to look away. A supervisor was skimming wages from our checks. I spoke up, and it cost me my job. Almost cost me my home, too. So why did you do it? Eliza asked, her voice tinged with frustration. If you knew what you'd lose. Because there's a cost either way, Ruth replied, her tone firm but kind. Staying silent chips away at you. You lose pieces of yourself until there's nothing left. Speaking out, yes, it's hard, but it lets you keep your dignity. Eliza looked away, Ruth's words settling uncomfortably in her chest. Dignity doesn't pay rent? No, it doesn't, Ruth admitted, but sometimes it opens doors you didn't know were there. Silence hung between them, heavy and contemplative. Finally, Ruth reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photograph. She slid it across the table to Eliza. The photo showed a group of women standing outside a factory, their faces serious but determined. In the corner of the image was a younger Ruth, her features unmistakable. "We didn't win every fight," Ruth said, her voice softening, "but the ones we did win, they mattered, and they matter still." Eliza studied the photo, her fingers brushing the edges. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I see a lot of myself in you," Ruth said. "And because I think you're stronger than you realize?" Vivian Harper sat in her sprawling office, her hands steepled as Clara rattled off a list of updates. The board meeting had gone smoothly, but the anonymous letter still lingered in the back of her mind. Vivian had spent the day poring over financial reports and public feedback, searching for cracks in the foundation of her carefully curated empire. "Vivian?" Clara's voice cut through her thoughts. Vivian blinked, focusing on her assistant. "I said the event planning for next month is ahead of schedule," Clara repeated, her tone faintly exasperated. "Is everything all right?" Vivian hesitated before speaking. "Have you ever wondered if we're doing enough?" Clara frowned. "Enough." "For the people we claim to help," Vivian clarified. "The foundation raises millions, but are we truly making a difference?" Clara tilted her head, studying Vivian. "You've built scholarships, clinics, shelters. What more do you think you should be doing?" "I don't know," Vivian admitted, her voice quieter. "But lately, I feel like I've been looking at everything through the wrong lens." Clara set her tablet down, her expression turning cautious. "This isn't about that cleaner from the gala, is it?" Vivian didn't answer immediately. "Maybe it is. Or maybe she just made me realize how disconnected I've become." Clara sighed. "You're overthinking this. The foundation's impact speaks for itself. One disgruntled worker doesn't change that." Vivian nodded absently, but Clara's words didn't quell the growing unease in her chest. For years, Vivian had operated with the belief that her wealth was a force for good, but now cracks were appearing in that belief, and she wasn't sure how to fill them. Back at the community center, Eliza slipped the photograph into her pocket, the image of Ruth's determined younger self etched in her mind. As she stepped into the cool night air, Mark appeared beside her. "How'd it go?" he asked. Eliza shrugged. "I'm not sure, but she gave me a lot to think about." Mark smiled faintly. "That's Ruth for you." They walked in silence for a few moments before Eliza spoke. "Do you really think people will care about what I have to say?" "Yes," Mark said without hesitation, "but more importantly, I think you'll care. And that's what matters." Eliza didn't reply, but a small part of her began to believe him. For the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Eliza stood in the dimly lit office of her cleaning agency, the resignation letter clutched tightly in her hand. The words she had agonized over the night before felt heavier now, staring up at her from the neatly folded paper. She had rewritten the letter 3 times, each draft more uncertain than the last, but the act of holding it now seemed to solidify her decision. Mr. Grayson sat behind his desk, his tired eyes scanning the form she had just handed him. He sighed deeply, setting it down without meeting her gaze. "Are you sure about this, Eliza?" he asked, his tone tinged with concern. "You're one of my best workers." "I'm sure," she said, though her voice wavered. "It's time." Grayson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "I can't say I didn't see this coming after everything at the gala, but leaving without a backup plan, that's risky." Eliza's jaw tightened. "I'll figure it out." Grayson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Just know my door's open if you need it." She gave a curt nod and left the office before the emotions bubbling in her chest could spill over. On the walk home, the cool wind nipped at her cheeks, and doubt crept in with every step. Had she made the right choice? Liam depended on her income, and the thought of facing an uncertain future was terrifying. But Ruth's words echoed in her mind. There's a cost, either way. Speaking out lets you keep your dignity. When she reached her apartment, Liam was awake, sprawled on the couch with a comic book. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing. "You look like someone stole your lunch money." "Not exactly," she muttered, tossing her bag onto the counter. "I quit my job." Liam's eyebrows shot up. "You did what?" Eliza slumped into a chair. "I couldn't keep going like that. They made it clear I wasn't welcome at the high-profile events anymore, and after everything, I just couldn't stay." Liam set the comic book down and leaned forward, concern etched across his face. "Eliza, we need the money." "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "but I can't keep living like this, always being the one who gets stepped on, always being invisible." "What are you going to do now?" he asked, his tone softer. She hesitated, then pulled Mark's card from her pocket. "There's this journalist. He thinks my story could make a difference." Liam stared at her, then slowly nodded. "Do you trust him?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I have to try." Vivian sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the Harper Foundation's boardroom, her hands folded neatly in front of her. The senior members of her team were mid-discussion, debating the logistics of an upcoming event, but Vivian found her focus slipping. Her gaze drifted to the city skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, her thoughts tangled. "Vivian?" Clara's voice pulled her back to the present. "Yes," she asked, blinking. "We were discussing the keynote speaker for the gala," Clara said, her tone laced with subtle irritation. "Any preferences?" Vivian shook her head. "I trust your judgment." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't push further. The meeting continued, but Vivian's attention wandered again, landing on the folder in front of her. Inside were detailed reports on the Foundation's initiatives, numbers and charts that painted a glowing picture of success. Yet they felt hollow. After the meeting, Vivian retreated to her office, closing the door behind her. She sank into her chair and opened her laptop, hesitating before typing a name into the search bar. Eliza Parker. The results were sparse. Social media profiles that hadn't been updated in years, a few employment records. Vivian clicked through them, her guilt mounting. She didn't know what she was looking for, but the act of searching felt like a small step towards something. Understanding, maybe. Redemption, perhaps. A knock on her door startled her. Clara entered, holding a stack of documents. "These need your signature." Vivian gestured for her to set them on the desk. As Clara placed the papers down, her eyes flicked to the laptop screen. "Looking into the cleaner," Vivian stiffened. "She has a name." Clara raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Vivian sighed. "I can't shake the feeling that I failed her." Clara's expression softened slightly. "Vivian, you can't carry the weight of every single person. You do more good than most people ever will." "But is it enough?" Vivian asked quietly. Clara hesitated, then placed a hand on Vivian's shoulder. "That's a question only you can answer." Eliza met Mark at a small diner later that evening, her nerves fraying as she slid into the booth across from him. He greeted her with a smile, but his usual easy demeanor seemed more subdued. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, echoing the words she had heard all day. "No," she replied honestly, "but I've made my choice." Mark nodded, pulling out his notebook. "Then let's get started." They talked for hours, Eliza recounting her experiences with unflinching honesty. Mark's questions were gentle but probing, drawing out details she hadn't realized she was holding back. By the time they finished, her voice was hoarse, but her heart felt lighter. "What happens now?" she asked. "I'll start drafting the piece," Mark said. "But I'll run everything by you before it goes public." Eliza nodded, her chest tightening. The thought of her story out in the world was both terrifying and exhilarating. What if nobody cares? "They will," Mark said firmly. "And even if they don't, you'll know you spoke your truth." As she walked home, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement, Eliza felt a strange mix of fear and hope. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was stepping into the unknown, unsure of what awaited her, but determined to face it head-on. And though she didn't know it, Vivian Harper was beginning to do the same. Eliza sat in her apartment, the weight of silence pressing heavily around her. Liam had fallen asleep early, his soft snores a rhythmic background to the swirling thoughts in her mind. She stared at the notes Mark had given her, a rough outline of the story he intended to publish. Her name was at the top, bold and unmistakable, a stark reminder that her life was about to change irrevocably. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. The screen lit up with Mark's name. She hesitated before answering. "Hey," his voice came through, steady but concerned. "I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" Eliza sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I don't know. This feels big. Too big." "It is big," Mark admitted. "But you're not alone in this. I've got your back." "Do you think people will actually listen?" she asked, her voice small. "I do," he said firmly. "But even if they don't, speaking out is still worth it. You're shining a light on something people need to see." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Thanks, Mark, for everything." "Anytime," he replied. "And remember, you can back out if it feels like too much. No judgment." Eliza swallowed hard. "No, I'm in." At the Harper Foundation, Vivian paced her office, the faint hum of the city night filtering through the windows. The anonymous letter still sat on her desk, its message gnawing at her. She had spent the day probing her staff, searching for any hint of dissatisfaction or disloyalty, but nothing concrete had emerged. Clara entered without knocking, a habit that Vivian had long stopped addressing. She held a thick folder and wore her usual air of efficiency. "I've compiled the latest reports," Clara announced, placing the folder on Vivian's desk. "Fundraising is up 10% from last quarter." Vivian barely glanced at it. "Clara, have you noticed anything unusual lately? Any murmurs of discontent?" Clara frowned, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Not really." "Why?" Vivian hesitated, then gestured to the letter. "This has been bothering me. What if there's something we've missed, something brewing under the surface?" Clara picked up the letter, her lips tightening as she read it again. "Whoever sent this is trying to get under your skin. You've built an impeccable reputation, Vivian. Don't let one piece of paper unravel it." "But what if they're right?" Vivian pressed. "What if we've been blind to the people we claim to be helping?" Clara's gaze softened, though her tone remained firm. "Vivian, you can't fix everything. The Foundation does real, measurable good. Don't lose sight of that." Vivian nodded absently, but Clara's reassurances did little to ease her growing unease. The next morning, Eliza met Mark at a coffee shop. The place was quiet, the clatter of mugs and the soft hum of conversation providing a comforting backdrop. Mark greeted her with his usual warm smile and handed her a printed draft of the article. "Take your time," he said. "Let me know if there's anything you want changed." Eliza scanned the pages, her chest tightening as she read her own words reflected back at her. Mark had captured her story with precision and empathy, highlighting the long hours, the mistreatment, the constant fear of being seen as disposable. He hadn't shied away from calling out the systemic inequalities that had made her struggle invisible to people like Vivian Harper. When she finished, she looked up, her throat dry. "It's good," she said softly. "Better than I expected." Mark smiled. "That's high praise coming from you." She smirked faintly. "What happens next?" "I send it to my editor," he explained. "If all goes well, it'll be published by the end of the week." The weight of his words settled over her, both exhilarating and terrifying. What if they tried to discredit me? "They might," Mark admitted, "but we'll handle it. You're not alone in this, Eliza." She nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. "Okay, let's do it." Across town, Vivian was meeting with Henry, an old friend and labor rights attorney. They sat in a quiet corner of a bustling restaurant, their conversation low and serious. "I need your perspective," Vivian said, stirring her tea absently. "Am I missing something? Are we failing the people we're supposed to help?" Henry raised an eyebrow. "That's a heavy question. What brought this on?" Vivian hesitated, then recounted the incident at the gala and the letter that had followed. Henry listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "It sounds like you're starting to see cracks in the system," he said finally. "That's not a bad thing, Vivian. It means you're paying attention." "But am I too late?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Have I been blind to the harm we might be causing?" Henry leaned back, studying her. "The fact that you're asking these questions means you're not blind, but you need to dig deeper. Find out what's really going on, and then decide what kind of change you're willing to make." Vivian nodded, his words sparking a resolve she hadn't felt in years. "I will." That evening, Eliza and Liam shared a quiet dinner. She had told him about the article, about her decision to move forward despite the risks. He listened without interrupting, his usual teasing demeanor replaced by quiet support. "I'm proud of you," he said finally, his voice soft. "It's scary, but you're doing the right thing." Eliza blinked back sudden tears. "I hope so." "You are," he insisted, "and no matter what happens, we'll get through it." She smiled, the knot in her chest loosening slightly. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground, even as the future remained uncertain. As the city settled into the quiet hum of night, two women in very different worlds prepared to face the unknown, their paths inching closer with each passing moment, one seeking redemption, the other seeking justice, both unknowingly tied to a truth neither could yet see. The next morning dawned heavy with anticipation. Eliza woke to the sound of Liam clinking dishes in the kitchen. She rolled out of bed, still groggy, and found him pouring cereal into a chipped bowl. "You're up early," she said, rubbing her eyes. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep, thought I'd make myself useful." Eliza smiled faintly and joined him at the table. The sunlight streaming through the window was deceptively warm, masking the chill of uncertainty in her chest. Mark had messaged her the night before. "The article goes live tomorrow morning." Tomorrow. It felt surreal. She picked at her toast, her appetite absent. "Oh, you're thinking about the article, aren't you?" Liam asked, breaking the silence. "Is it that obvious?" she replied with a weak laugh. "Only a little," he said, grinning. Then his expression turned serious. "You're brave, Eliza. Braver than you think." She didn't feel brave. She felt like she was teetering on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether she was about to fall or take flight. Meanwhile, at the Harper Foundation, Vivian sat in her office, flipping through reports that no longer held her attention. The nagging doubt that had settled in her mind since the gala had only grown stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that her efforts, though grand on paper, were somehow missing the mark. Clara entered with her usual brisk efficiency, carrying a tablet. "The quarterly meeting with the board is scheduled for this afternoon," she said, not looking up as she tapped at the screen. "I've prepared the presentation." "Thank you," Vivian replied absently. Clara paused, sensing her hesitation. "Something on your mind?" Vivian hesitated. Clara had been her closest confidant for years, but lately their conversations felt more like business transactions than genuine exchanges. Still, she decided to be honest. "Do you think we're really making a difference?" Vivian asked, her voice quiet. Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are we addressing the root of the problems, or are we just putting on a good show?" Vivian leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "I've been thinking about the workers, the people at the bottom of the chain. Do we really know what they're going through?" Clara's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance. "Vivian, we're a foundation, not a social justice crusade. We can't fix everything." "That's not the point," Vivian said sharply. "If we're not even trying to understand, then what's the purpose?" Clara's eyes narrowed. "You're letting one incident cloud your judgment. You've spent years building this organization's reputation. Don't let self-doubt unravel it." Vivian didn't respond. Clara's words were logical, but they didn't quell the gnawing discomfort in her heart. That afternoon, Eliza made her way to the community center. Mark had invited her to meet with a few other workers who had faced similar struggles. She was nervous, unsure of what to expect, but Ruth's encouragement echoed in her mind. "You're not alone in this." Inside the modest meeting room, a small group of people sat in a loose circle. Mark greeted her warmly and introduced her to the others, a middle-aged janitor named Carlos, a young waitress named Mia, and an older woman named Denise who worked as a caregiver. Their faces were worn but kind, their eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and resilience. "Thank you for coming," Mark said, gesturing for Eliza to take a seat. "I thought it might help to connect with others who understand what you're going through." At first, Eliza felt awkward, unsure of what to say, but as the others began sharing their stories, she found herself nodding along, their experiences striking familiar chords. Carlos spoke of long nights scrubbing floors, only to be reprimanded for minor mistakes. Mia described dealing with rude customers while barely making enough to cover her rent. Denise talked about the emotional toll of caring for patients who rarely showed her gratitude. When it was her turn, Eliza hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've always felt invisible," she began. "Like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough. People don't see me, they see a uniform, a role, something disposable." The group listened intently, their nods encouraging her to continue. By the time she finished, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had lifted slightly. For the first time in years, she felt seen. "You're not invisible to us," Carlos said, his voice steady, "and you're not disposable." Eliza's throat tightened with emotion, but she managed a small smile. "Thank you." As the meeting wrapped up, Mark handed her a printout of the article, now finalized. "It goes live tomorrow," he said. "Are you ready?" She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she nodded anyway. "I think so." That evening, Vivian sat alone in her penthouse, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside her. She stared at the city skyline, her mind racing. Henry's words from their lunch replayed in her head. "You need to dig deeper." She opened her laptop and began searching for more information about the gala staff, hoping to find some insight into their lives. Her search eventually led her to an online forum where workers anonymously shared their experiences. The stories she read were heartbreaking: long hours, low pay, disrespect, and constant fear of losing their jobs. One post in particular caught her attention. The writer described an incident at a high-profile event where they were falsely accused of theft. The details matched the gala perfectly. As Vivian read the post, her chest tightened. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of discomfort, it was a systemic issue, and she had been complicit in it. She leaned back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of guilt and determination. Something had to change, and she couldn't look away any longer. As the clock struck midnight, two women lay awake in different corners of the city. Eliza stared at the ceiling, bracing herself for the storm that the article's release might bring. Vivian gazed out at the city lights, her resolve hardening with each passing minute. Though they were worlds apart, their journeys were inching closer, driven by truths they could no longer ignore. The ties to their old lives were fraying, and new alliances were beginning to take shape, setting the stage for the battles ahead. The morning the article was published, Eliza woke to an unusual quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the calm before a storm. She pulled her phone from the nightstand, her hand trembling as she opened the link Mark had sent. There it was, her story, bold and raw, sitting on a news site that reached thousands. The headline read, "Invisible No More, a cleaner's fight against inequality." Her name sat just below it, a beacon of vulnerability and defiance. She read every word, though she knew the story by heart. Mark had captured her voice, her fears, and her pain with such clarity that it almost felt like someone else's life on the page. A knock at her door startled her. Liam peeked in, holding his phone. "You're famous," he said, his grin wide despite his pale complexion. "Don't joke about this," she muttered, pulling on her sweater. "I'm not," he insisted, stepping into the room. "Have you seen the comments?" "People are already talking about it." She hesitated before opening the article again and scrolling to the comments section. The responses were a mix of outrage, support, and skepticism. Finally, someone is speaking up for the little guy. Stories like this are why we need better worker protections. This is just another sob story from someone who couldn't handle hard work. Eliza's stomach twisted, but Liam placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ignore the trolls. The people who matter, they're listening." At the Harper Foundation, Vivian sat at her desk, sipping her morning coffee as Clara entered with a tablet in hand. "Morning," Clara said briskly. "You'll want to see this." Vivian frowned as Clara placed the tablet in front of her. The article's headline jumped out immediately, and Vivian's heart sank. She read it once, then again, her grip on the tablet tightening. It wasn't just the story, it was the implications, the truths that hit too close to home. "This could be a problem," Clara said, folding her arms. "She's calling out the very events we host." "It's more than a problem," Vivian murmured, setting the tablet down. "It's a wake-up call." Clara raised an eyebrow. "A wake-up call, Vivian. She's accusing us, your foundation, of perpetuating inequality. We need to issue a statement." "A statement won't fix this," Vivian said, standing abruptly. "We need to do more." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Vivian hesitated. "I'm not sure yet, but I need to meet her." Clara blinked. "Meet her? You're the head of a multi-million-dollar foundation, Vivian. You can't just—" "Clara," Vivian interrupted, her tone firm. "I've made up my mind." Clara sighed but didn't argue further. "I'll make the arrangements." Eliza spent most of the day glued to her phone, alternating between reading comments and responding to messages from Mark. The article had been shared hundreds of times, each notification both thrilling and terrifying. When a new email popped up in her inbox, she hesitated before opening it. It was from Vivian Harper. Ems. Parker. "I've read the article and would like to meet with you to discuss it further. Please let me know if you're willing to sit down for a conversation. I believe we may have more in common than it seems. Best regards, Vivian Harper." Eliza stared at the screen, her heart pounding. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered. "What is it?" Liam asked from the couch. She turned the phone toward him. "Vivian Harper wants to meet." Liam raised an eyebrow. "The Vivian Harper?" Eliza nodded. "I don't trust her." "Maybe you don't have to trust her," Liam said, "but if she's reaching out, she's nervous. That's something." Eliza frowned. "Or she's trying to save face." "Could be both," Liam said with a shrug. "But if you don't talk to her, you might always wonder what she wanted." Vivian sat in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, the sounds of steaming milk and clinking mugs blending into the background. She had chosen the location deliberately, neutral, unassuming. She tapped her fingers against her cup, her nerves uncharacteristically frayed. When Eliza walked in, her shoulders tense and her gaze sharp, Vivian rose to greet her. "Ms. Parker, thank you for coming." Eliza hesitated before shaking her hand. "You didn't really leave me much choice, did you?" Vivian offered a small smile. "I suppose not." "Please, sit." Eliza slid into the chair across from her, her posture stiff. "So, what do you want?" "I wanted to apologize," Vivian said, her voice earnest, "for what happened at the gala, for the way you were treated. It was wrong, and I should have spoken up." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "That's convenient, now that the article's out." Vivian flinched but didn't argue. "You're right. The article forced me to confront things I've ignored for too long. But I don't want this to be about damage control. I want to understand." Eliza leaned back, crossing her arms. "Understand what? What it's like to clean up after people who don't even see you, to be blamed for things you didn't do." "Yes," Vivian said quietly, "and to figure out how to do better." Eliza studied her, searching for cracks in her polished facade. To her surprise, she saw vulnerability, a woman unmoored, trying to navigate a truth she had long avoided. "I don't know if I believe you," Eliza said finally, "but if you're serious, you've got a lot to learn." Vivian nodded. "Then teach me." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. For the first time, the chasm between their worlds felt less insurmountable, though the path forward was still uncertain. As they left the cafe, neither woman realized how much that meeting would change them, or the lives of those around them. The first threads of connection had been woven, fragile but real, and both of them were about to discover just how deep the ties between them truly ran. Eliza walked home from the cafe in a daze, her mind replaying every moment of the conversation with Vivian Harper. The apology had been unexpected, disarming even, but it wasn't enough to erase years of struggle or the humiliation she had endured. Vivian's words seemed genuine, yet the skepticism ingrained in Eliza's survival instincts told her not to trust too quickly. When she entered the apartment, Liam was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Well?" he asked. "How did it go?" Eliza dropped her bag by the door and sank into the armchair. "Weird. She apologized." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Vivian Harper apologized." "Yeah," Eliza replied, still trying to wrap her head around it. "She said she wants to learn, to understand. And you believe her?" "I don't know," Eliza admitted, "but she seemed different, not like what I expected." Liam studied her for a moment, then nodded. "So what's next?" Eliza sighed. "She wants to meet again. I said I'd think about it." "You're playing with fire," Liam warned. "People like her. They're good at making themselves look good. Be careful." Eliza nodded, appreciating his caution. "I will." Vivian returned to her penthouse feeling uncharacteristically shaken. The conversation with Eliza had been humbling in a way she hadn't anticipated. The young woman's blunt honesty had cut through Vivian's polished facade, leaving her exposed. For the first time, she had confronted the idea that her wealth and privilege weren't just tools for philanthropy. They were part of the problem. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled into the plush armchair in her living room. Her assistant, Clara, called shortly after, her voice brisk as always. "How did it go?" Clara asked. Vivian hesitated. "It was enlightening." Clara scoffed lightly. "Enlightening? Vivian, this woman publicly criticized your foundation. You're giving her too much credit. She's not wrong, Clara," Vivian said sharply, "about the way workers are treated, about the gap between the image we project and the reality they live." Clara was silent for a moment. Then her tone softened. "You've built something incredible, Vivian. Don't let one woman's perspective undermine that." "It's not just her perspective," Vivian replied, her voice quiet but firm. "It's the truth." The next day, Mark met Eliza at the community center, where Ruth had invited them for a small gathering. Eliza appreciated the sense of solidarity the group provided, even if she still felt like an outsider at times. Ruth greeted her warmly, offering a cup of tea as they settled into their usual circle. "Word spreading about the article," Ruth said, her sharp eyes twinkling. "People are starting to pay attention." "Yeah, but not all of it's good," Eliza muttered, thinking of the more hostile comments she'd seen online. "That's the nature of change," Ruth said. "It's messy. People resist it, especially those who have the most to lose." Eliza nodded, but her thoughts were still tangled. "Vivian Harper reached out to me," she admitted, glancing at the others. The room fell quiet, the group exchanging curious looks. "She apologized," Eliza continued, "said she wants to understand." Carlos, the janitor, leaned forward. "And you believe her?" "I don't know," Eliza said honestly. "But if she's serious, maybe it's worth trying." Ruth nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes change starts in the most unlikely places, but tread carefully, Eliza. People like her. They're not used to hearing no." At the Harper Foundation, Vivian had called an emergency meeting with her senior staff. The room was tense, the usual air of self-congratulation replaced with unease. Clara sat beside her, her expression neutral but her posture rigid. "Thank you for coming," Vivian began, her voice steady but carrying an edge. "I've been thinking a lot about the article that was published. It highlighted issues we've ignored for too long." One of the board members, an older man named Gerald, frowned. "Vivian, with all due respect, our mission has always been clear. We provide scholarships, healthcare, and shelter. We can't be responsible for every societal problem." "I'm not asking us to solve every problem," Vivian replied, "but we need to acknowledge the ones we've contributed to," Clara interjected, her tone calm but firm. "Vivian, the Foundation's reputation is built on trust. A public admission of fault could undermine everything we've achieved." "Then maybe it needs to be undermined," Vivian shot back, surprising even herself with the force of her conviction. "What's the point of all this if we're not making real change?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. For the first time, Vivian felt the distance between herself and her team, a divide born of years spent avoiding hard truths. That evening, Eliza received another email from Vivian, this one more direct. "Ems, Parker. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I'd like to take the next step and invite you to visit the Harper Foundation offices. I believe seeing things from my side might provide context, and I'd value your perspective on how we can do better. Please let me know if you're willing. Best regards, Vivian Harper." Eliza stared at the message, her emotions warring. Was this a genuine invitation, or just another attempt to control the narrative? She forwarded the email to Mark, adding a single line, "What do you think?" Mark called her almost immediately. "It's a risk," he said, "but it could also be an opportunity. If she's serious about change, this might be your chance to push for something real. Eliza nodded, though he couldn't see her. I'll think about it. As she sat in the quiet of her apartment, Eliza felt the weight of her decisions more acutely than ever. She had stepped into the unknown, and the path forward was anything but clear. But for the first time, she began to see the faint outlines of a bridge, one that might, just might, connect her world to Vivian's. Eliza stood outside the Harper Foundation's imposing glass building, staring up at the sleek facade that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The contrast between this polished world and her modest life felt sharper than ever, like a jagged edge she had no choice but to navigate. She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag and took a steadying breath. Mark's words from the night before echoed in her mind. It's an opportunity to make them listen, but remember, you're not there to appease them. She had nodded, determined, but now her resolve wavered. What did she have to offer in this world of power and privilege? The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile and directed her to the 22nd floor. The elevator ride felt endless, the silence within broken only by the faint hum of machinery. When the doors opened, Vivian Harper was waiting. "Miss Parker," Vivian said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Eliza hesitated before shaking it. "I wasn't sure if I should." Vivian offered a small, disarming smile. "I'm glad you did. Let me show you around." They walked through the spacious office, Vivian pointing out various departments: marketing, research, event planning. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, their polished appearances and confident strides making Eliza feel acutely out of place. "This is where we plan most of our initiatives," Vivian explained as they entered a glass-walled conference room. "Scholarships, grants, healthcare programs, everything starts here." Eliza glanced at the sleek table and leather chairs, the pristine charts on the walls. "It's impressive," she admitted, though her tone carried a trace of skepticism. Vivian caught it. But it feels far away from the people you're helping," Eliza said bluntly. "Do you ever actually talk to them? Hear what they need?" Vivian paused, her expression thoughtful. "Not as often as I should. That's something I want to change." Before Eliza could respond, Clara entered, her sharp heels clicking against the polished floor. She carried a tablet, her expression as composed as ever. "Vivian, the board is ready for your update," Clara said, her gaze briefly flicking to Eliza. "Miss Parker, welcome." "Thank you," Eliza replied coolly, sensing Clara's faint disapproval. Vivian turned to Eliza. "Would you mind joining us? I think your perspective could be valuable." Eliza hesitated, the weight of the request pressing down on her. "You really want me in there?" "Yes," Vivian said simply. "If we're going to make real change, it starts with uncomfortable conversations." Eliza followed them to the boardroom, where a group of well-dressed individuals sat around the table, their eyes turned to her as she entered, curiosity and skepticism etched into their faces. "Everyone, this is Eliza Parker," Vivian said, her tone steady. "Her story was featured in the recent article, and I've asked her here to share her experiences." A murmur rippled through the room. Eliza sat down, her back straight and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Miss Parker," one of the board members began, his tone measured, "we've read the article. While it raises important points, it also paints the foundation in a less than flattering light. Can you elaborate on what you believe we're doing wrong?" Eliza met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "You focus on numbers, how many scholarships, how much money raised. But you don't see the people behind those numbers. You don't see what it's like to be treated as less than human by the very events that are supposed to help people like me." The room fell silent, her words hanging in the air. Vivian nodded slightly, her expression encouraging. Another board member, a woman with sharp features, frowned. It's not that we don't care, but there are limits to what we can address. That's the problem, Eliza said, her voice gaining strength. You stop at what's easy. You don't ask the hard questions, like why workers at your events are underpaid and overworked, or why people like me are invisible, until there's a headline to exploit. The woman's expression tightened, but she didn't respond. Clara shifted in her seat, her gaze fixed on Vivian. This is exactly why I brought Ms. Parker here, Vivian said, her voice calm but firm, to challenge us to do better. The conversation continued, the room growing increasingly tense. Eliza held her ground, answering questions and pushing back against dismissive comments. By the end of the meeting, she felt drained but oddly invigorated. As the board members filed out, Vivian lingered, her gaze thoughtful. You were incredible, she said. I just told the truth, Eliza replied. And that's exactly what we needed, Vivian said. This is just the beginning, Eliza. I hope you'll keep working with us. Eliza hesitated, the offer both tempting and daunting. We'll see. Later that evening, Eliza met Mark at their usual diner. She recounted the meeting, her words spilling out in a rush. I think she means it, Eliza said. I think she actually wants to change. Mark nodded, sipping his coffee. It's possible. But don't lose sight of your goals, Eliza. Don't let her world soften the edges of yours. I won't, she promised. Across town, Vivian sat alone in her penthouse, reflecting on the day. For the first time in years, she felt the stirrings of something she had thought lost, purpose. Eliza's words had cut deep, but they had also sparked a determination Vivian couldn't ignore. As the city settled into the quiet hum of night, two women on opposite sides of a fault line began to bridge the divide, each step tentative but significant. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, both believed it was a journey worth taking. Eliza's hands were still trembling as she stepped off the subway and onto the crowded platform. The intensity of the boardroom meeting lingered in her mind, every exchange replaying with vivid clarity. She had stood her ground against people who exuded power, their polished demeanor a stark contrast to her worn jeans and thrifted jacket. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she felt an unfamiliar spark of pride. Back at her apartment, Liam greeted her with a smirk. You look like you just went 10 rounds in a boxing ring. She dropped her bag and flopped onto the couch beside him. It felt like it. How did it go? He asked, handing her a glass of water. Eliza took a sip, letting the cool liquid soothe her dry throat. It was intense. They weren't exactly thrilled to hear what I had to say. Did they listen? I think so, she said, though doubt crept into her voice. Vivian did, at least. But the rest of them, they just kept throwing excuses at me. Liam leaned back, his brow furrowing. You think Harper's serious about this? Or is she just covering her tracks? Eliza hesitated. I don't know. She seems genuine, but it's hard to trust someone who's lived her whole life so far from all this. Trust your gut, Liam said. It's gotten you this far. She nodded, though her gut felt as conflicted as her thoughts. At the Harper Foundation, Vivian sat in her office, staring at the city skyline. The meeting had been productive, but not without resistance. Clara had cornered her afterward, her frustration palpable. Vivian, Clara began, shutting the door behind her. This is getting out of hand. Vivian turned, her expression calm but firm. What is this experiment? Clara said, gesturing vaguely. Bringing Eliza Parker into our meetings, allowing her to question us in front of the board. It's risky and, frankly, unnecessary. It's necessary, Vivian replied. her voice steady. "If we're going to claim we're making a difference, we have to be willing to hear the hard truths." Clara's gaze hardened. "At what cost? Do you realize how this could damage your reputation?" "My reputation isn't what matters," Vivian said, her tone sharpening. "The lives we're affecting do." For a moment, the two women stared at each other, the tension thick between them. Finally, Clara sighed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "You've always trusted your instincts, Vivian. I just hope you know what you're doing." "So do I," Vivian admitted quietly. Later that week, Vivian invited Eliza to join her for a visit to one of the Foundation's shelters. The building was located in a struggling neighborhood, its brick exterior weathered but sturdy. Inside, the air buzzed with quiet activity. Volunteers folding donated clothes, staff assisting residents with paperwork, and children playing in a corner filled with second-hand toys. "This is one of our flagship projects," Vivian explained as they walked through the space. "We house over 50 families here, and our outreach programs help them find jobs and permanent housing." Eliza observed everything carefully. The staff seemed kind, the residents cautious but grateful. Yet she couldn't help but notice the cracks, the worn furniture, the tired eyes of the workers, the sense that everyone was just barely managing. "It's a good start," Eliza said finally. "But do you ask the people here what they really need, or do you decide for them?" Vivian stopped, taken aback. "We provide the resources we think will help." "Maybe that's the problem," Eliza said. "You're guessing instead of listening." Before Vivian could respond, a woman approached them, her young daughter clinging to her leg. The woman's face lit up with recognition. "Ms. Harper, thank you so much for what you've done here." Vivian smiled warmly. "I'm glad the shelter is helping your family." "It is," the woman said, then hesitated. "But some of us were wondering if there's a way to get more support with childcare. A lot of us want to work, but finding someone to watch the kids is impossible." Vivian nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a good point. I'll speak with the team about adding childcare options." The woman thanked her and walked away, but Eliza couldn't resist a pointed look. "See, listening." Vivian sighed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're not going to let me off easy, are you?" "Not a chance," Eliza replied. As the day wound down, the two women sat on a bench outside the shelter, the city's noise a distant hum. For the first time, their conversation felt less like a confrontation and more like a collaboration. "You said something at the meeting that stuck with me," Vivian said, breaking the silence. "You called us out for focusing on numbers instead of people." "You were right." Eliza glanced at her, surprised by the admission. "I didn't think you'd admit that." "I'm learning," Vivian said with a small smile. "It's not easy, but I want to do better." Eliza nodded, her guard softening slightly. "If you're serious about this, you've got a long road ahead." "I know," Vivian said, "and I hope you'll help me navigate it." Eliza hesitated, the weight of the offer pressing down on her. "I'll think about it." As they parted ways, both women felt the faint stirrings of change, not just in their work, but in themselves. The walls they had built around their worlds were beginning to crack, revealing a shared humanity neither had expected to find. Yet the path ahead was still fraught with challenges, trust was fragile, and the forces resisting change were powerful. But for the first time, both Vivian and Eliza felt a glimmer of hope that their unlikely alliance might just make a difference. The light drizzle falling over the city mirrored Eliza's mood as she walked home from a meeting with Mark and Ruth. Their discussion had been productive, mapping out ways to amplify the momentum from the article, but it had also left her feeling overwhelmed. The attention her story was garnering was both thrilling and unnerving, and the weight of representing so many others like her felt impossibly heavy. When she reached her apartment, she found Liam waiting for her with an unusual expression, half amused, half anxious. "You've got mail," he said, holding up a crisp white envelope. Eliza frowned, taking it from him. Her name was written neatly on the front, but there was no return address. She opened it carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. As her eyes scanned the typed words, her breath caught. "Mims, Parker, you're playing a dangerous game. Stay in your lane before you regret it." The paper trembled in her hands. "What the—" Liam grabbed it, reading quickly. His face darkened. "This has to be from someone pissed off about the article." "Great," Eliza muttered, sinking onto the couch. "Now I have to deal with threats on top of everything else." "Do you think it's serious?" Liam asked, his voice tinged with worry. "I don't know," Eliza admitted, "but I can't let it stop me." Liam placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone in this, okay? We'll figure it out." Across the city, Vivian sat at her desk, her fingers drumming lightly on the surface. She had spent the day reviewing the Foundation's records, searching for areas where they could do more. But her thoughts kept drifting to the pushback she had received after the board meeting. Clara, in particular, had been relentless, warning her about alienating key donors and destabilizing the Foundation's public image. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was an unknown number, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" "Ms. Harper," a low voice said, calm but firm. "You need to know what you're getting into with Eliza Parker." Vivian's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "Someone who cares about the Foundation's future," the voice replied. "Parker's not who you think she is. She's using you to push an agenda that'll destroy everything you've built." "That's ridiculous," Vivian said, her voice cold. "If you have something to say it openly." "Consider this a warning," the voice said before the line went dead. Vivian stared at the phone, a chill running through her. The call had been cryptic, but the insinuation was clear. Someone didn't want her working with Eliza. The next day, Vivian invited Eliza to her office to discuss the shelter visit and next steps. When Eliza arrived, she looked pale but determined, the anonymous letter still weighing on her mind. Vivian noticed immediately. "Is everything all right?" Vivian asked as they sat down. "Not really," Eliza admitted, hesitating before pulling the letter from her bag. "I got this yesterday." Vivian read the note, her expression darkening. "This is unacceptable. Have you reported it?" "No," Eliza said. "I didn't think it would help." "It might," Vivian said. "But even if it doesn't, we can't ignore this. Whoever sent this is trying to intimidate you." Eliza folded her arms. "It's not going to work." Vivian admired her resolve, but couldn't ignore the sense of responsibility settling over her. "You're not the only one being targeted," she said, recounting the anonymous call she had received. Eliza's eyes widened. "So they're coming after you too?" "It seems that way," Vivian said, "but I won't be bullied into backing down. This only proves that we're onto something important." For the first time, a sense of solidarity passed between them. Their experiences were worlds apart, but the threats against them underscored how deeply their efforts were unsettling the status quo. Meanwhile, Clara was in her office, furiously typing an email when her phone buzzed. She picked it up, glancing at the message with a frown. "Meeting tonight, 8 p.m., location sent separately. Urgent." Clara's gut twisted. The sender was an influential donor who had grown increasingly uneasy about Vivian's direction. Clara had tried to shield Vivian from their dissatisfaction, but tensions were rising. This meeting wasn't just urgent, it was a potential turning point. By the time Clara arrived at the dimly lit restaurant, several donors were already seated around a private table. The air was thick with unease as conversations overlapped, their tones sharp and impatient. "This can't go on," one man said, gesturing emphatically. "Vivian's putting everything we've worked for at risk. She's always been idealistic," another woman added, "but she's gone too far." Clara raised a hand, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I understand your concerns, but let's be clear. The Foundation's success depends on Vivian's leadership. Undermining her could do more harm than good." "She's already undermining herself," the first man countered. "This Eliza Parker situation is a liability. We need to act before it spirals further." Clara's mind raced. She had always been loyal to Vivian, but the donors were powerful, their influence impossible to ignore. "What are you suggesting?" A heavy silence fell before one of the donors spoke. "If Vivian won't correct course, we may need to consider other leadership." Clara's heart sank. The suggestion wasn't just a challenge, it was a threat. Back at her apartment, Eliza received another message from Mark. "There's chatter online about donor meetings at the Harper Foundation. I'll look into it, but watch your back." Eliza stared at the message, a mix of anger and determination swelling in her chest. The forces working against her, and now Vivian, were mobilizing. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. It was a battle against an entrenched system that would do anything to protect itself. As the city lights flickered outside, Eliza and Vivian found themselves bracing for the next wave of challenges, their fragile alliance more critical and more at risk than ever before. The tension in the Harper Foundation office was palpable. Vivian sat at the head of the conference table, her gaze steady but her mind swirling. Clara had called the meeting, insisting it was necessary to address the growing concerns among the board and donors. Vivian suspected she knew what that meant, but she wasn't about to let anyone undermine her efforts without a fight. "Thank you all for coming," Clara began, her tone brisk and professional. "As you know, recent developments have sparked significant public attention. While the article featuring Eliza Parker has generated important conversations, it has also caused concern among some of our key stakeholders." Vivian's jaw tightened, but she kept silent, allowing Clara to continue. "The donors and board members feel that the Foundation's reputation could be at risk if we're perceived as aligning too closely with—" Clara paused delicately. "Divisive rhetoric." Vivian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "You mean the truth?" Clara hesitated, clearly thrown off by Vivian's sharp tone. "The truth, yes, but presented in a way that could alienate supporters who've contributed to the Foundation's success." Vivian leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "If our supporters are uncomfortable because we're finally addressing real issues, then perhaps we need new supporters." A murmur rippled through the room, some of the board members exchanging uneasy glances. Gerald, the most senior member, cleared his throat. "Vivian, no one is questioning your dedication, but we've built this foundation on trust and collaboration. Sudden shifts in direction, especially ones that could be perceived as political, might jeopardize everything we've achieved." Vivian's voice remained calm, but her words carried weight. "What we've achieved means nothing if we ignore the people who need us most. Eliza's story isn't an outlier. It's the reality for countless workers who are invisible to the world we operate in." Clara's voice was measured but firm. "And alienating donors will only reduce our ability to help those workers. Then we find new ways to fund our work," Vivian said. "I won't compromise on what's right to appease those who prefer comfort over change." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara's expression betrayed a flicker of frustration, but she quickly masked it. Gerald leaned back in his chair, studying Vivian with a measured gaze. "Let's table this for now," he suggested. "We need time to consider all perspectives." Vivian nodded, though her patience was wearing thin. "Fine, but know this, the direction I'm pushing for isn't negotiable." If this foundation claims to serve people, then we have to start listening to them. The meeting adjourned shortly after, but the air of conflict lingered. As the board members filtered out, Clara stayed behind, her eyes narrowing slightly as she approached Vivian. "We've always worked well together," Clara said, her voice soft but pointed. "Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment now." Vivian stared at her, a pang of betrayal twisting in her chest. "My judgment is clearer than it's ever been. Maybe you're the one who needs to re-examine your priorities." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "I just hope you're prepared for what this fight will cost." Meanwhile, Eliza sat across from Mark in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Mark had been digging into the recent donor meetings at the foundation, and the findings were troubling. "Some of the biggest donors are talking about pulling their funding," Mark said, his voice low. "They're not happy with the direction Vivian's taking." Eliza frowned, her fingers tightening around the mug. "So they're trying to pressure her into backing down?" "Exactly," Mark replied. "It's not just about money, it's about control. They don't want to see her shaking the system." Eliza leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Do you think she'll cave?" Mark hesitated. "Honestly, I don't know. She's taken some big risks already, but this is uncharted territory for someone like her." Eliza exhaled sharply, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "If she gives in, nothing changes. And if she doesn't, she could lose everything," Mark added. The gravity of his words hung in the air. Eliza had spent years fighting to be seen, to have her voice heard. Now that she had a platform, the stakes felt impossibly high, not just for her, but for everyone she represented. "She has to hold the line," Eliza said firmly. "If she doesn't, then what's the point?" Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She might need a push to remember that." Later that evening, Eliza found herself walking toward the Harper Foundation building. She hadn't planned to visit, but something inside her urged her to go. When she arrived, she was surprised to see Vivian still in her office, the light spilling out into the empty hallway. Eliza hesitated before knocking lightly on the glass door. Vivian looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "Eliza," she said, standing. "What brings you here?" "I heard about the donor meetings," Eliza said bluntly. "Are they really trying to strong-arm you?" Vivian sighed, gesturing for Eliza to sit. "Some of them are, yes. They think I'm pushing too far, too fast. Are they right?" Eliza asked, her gaze steady. Vivian met her eyes, her voice resolute. "No, but that doesn't mean it won't be a fight." "Then fight," Eliza said, leaning forward. "You've got the power to make a real difference, Vivian. Don't let them scare you into giving up." Vivian studied her, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You're remarkably persuasive. You know that." Eliza shrugged. "I've had to be." They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights twinkling outside the window. For all their differences, they shared a growing understanding of what was at stake and the courage it would take to face what lay ahead. Vivian finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "You're right. If I back down now, I'll regret it forever, and so will they." Eliza nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "Then let's not let them win." In that moment, an unlikely alliance solidified. Their fight was far from over, but together they were ready to draw the lines they refused to cross and to face whatever came next. The tension within the Harper Foundation had become impossible to ignore. Vivian's stance had driven a wedge between her and some of the most powerful figures in her orbit. Clara, once her most trusted confidant, had grown colder, her words clipped and calculated in every interaction. The boardroom, which once felt like Vivian's domain, now seemed like hostile territory. Vivian leaned over her desk, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face in the darkened office. She was reviewing a draft proposal for a new initiative aimed at addressing systemic inequality in workplace practices. It was ambitious, perhaps overly so, but she knew it was necessary. The sound of her office door opening broke her focus. She looked up to see Clara standing there, her posture as rigid as ever. "Working late again," Clara remarked, stepping inside. "There's a lot to do," Vivian replied evenly, not looking away from her screen. Clara set a folder on the desk with a deliberate thud. "I thought you might want to see this." Vivian opened the folder, her brow furrowing as she scanned its contents. It was a detailed breakdown of donor contributions and the alarming drop in pledges over the past month. Attached was a memo outlining the board's growing concerns. "This is a direct result of the article and your recent decisions," Clara said, her voice measured but firm. "Some of our biggest supporters are withdrawing their funding. We can't sustain this." Vivian closed the folder and looked up at Clara. "If we lose donors because we're doing the right thing, then maybe we don't need them." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's idealistic, Vivian, and dangerous." "What's dangerous?" Vivian countered, her tone sharpening, "is pretending everything is fine while people like Eliza and her co-workers are suffering." Clara hesitated, the tension between them palpable. "The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps," she said finally. "I suggest you prepare for a difficult conversation." Vivian watched Clara leave, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She leaned back in her chair, her resolve hardening. If the board was ready to challenge her, she would be ready to fight back. Eliza spent the morning at the community center, helping Ruth organize a worker advocacy meeting. The room was buzzing with activity, the air thick with a mix of hope and frustration as workers shared their stories. Eliza felt a sense of purpose she hadn't known before, but the looming challenges weighed heavily on her. Ruth approached her, holding a clipboard. "You've done good work here, Eliza. People are starting to listen." "I hope so," Eliza said, adjusting a stack of flyers. "But it still feels like an uphill battle." "Change always does," Ruth replied. "The question is, are you willing to see it through, no matter how steep the climb?" Eliza nodded, though doubt lingered at the edges of her resolve. "I'm trying." Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression gentle but firm. "Trying is enough, for now." As the meeting wrapped up, Mark arrived, his face lit with urgency. "Eliza, can we talk?" She followed him into the hallway, her stomach twisting at his serious tone. "What's going on?" "I've been digging into the Harper Foundation's donor situation," Mark said. "There's a lot of pressure building. Some of the board members are actively working to undermine Vivian." Eliza's eyes widened. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that they're considering removing her as CEO," Mark said. "If that happens, everything she's been fighting for could be undone." The news hit Eliza like a punch to the gut. She had her doubts about Vivian at first, but over the past weeks she had seen a genuine commitment to change. Losing her now would be a devastating setback. "Does she know?" Eliza asked. Mark nodded. "She's meeting with the board tomorrow. It's going to be a battle." Eliza's mind raced. Vivian had stood by her, even when it put her own position at risk. Now it was Eliza's turn to return the favor. The next day, Vivian entered the boardroom with her head held high, her expression calm but determined. The tension in the room was suffocating. The board members seated around the long table exchanging glances as she took her place at the head. "Thank you all for being here," Vivian began, her voice steady. "I understand there are concerns about the Foundation's recent direction." Gerald, the senior board member, spoke first. "Vivian, we've always admired your passion, but the recent decisions have created a rift with our donors. We have to consider the long-term stability of the Foundation." "And you believe stability comes from avoiding difficult truths?" Vivian asked, her tone sharp but controlled. "If that's the case, then we've been building this foundation on a fragile foundation." Another board member chimed in. "We're not saying the issues aren't important, but there are ways to address them without alienating our supporters." "Compromise," Vivian said, her voice tinged with sarcasm. "That's what you're asking for. But compromise is what got us here, skimming the surface without addressing the root causes." Before anyone could respond, the door opened and Eliza stepped inside. The board members turned, their surprise evident. "Eliza," Vivian said, her surprise tempered with gratitude. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because what you're doing matters," Eliza said, her voice strong. She turned to the board. "I know you're worried about losing donors, but what's the point of this foundation if it's not willing to stand up for the people it claims to help?" Gerald frowned. "Ms. Parker, we're trying to balance—" "Balance?" Eliza interrupted. "That's just another way of saying you're afraid of change. But change doesn't come without discomfort. Vivian understands that, and if you let her go, you'll be proving that this foundation cares more about appearances than impact." The room fell silent, her words landing like a challenge. Vivian felt a surge of gratitude, her resolve bolstered by Eliza's presence. "Thank you, Eliza," Vivian said, turning back to the board. "This is the kind of truth we need to hear if we're going to make a real difference. I'm not backing down, and if that means losing donors or even my position, then so be it." The tension was palpable as the meeting adjourned, the board members leaving with conflicted expressions. Clara lingered for a moment, her gaze unreadable, before following the others out. Vivian and Eliza stood alone in the room, the weight of the confrontation settling over them. "You didn't have to do that," Vivian said quietly. "Yes, I did," Eliza replied. "We're in this together now." For the first time, Vivian felt the true strength of their alliance, an unlikely partnership forged in the fire of shared purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The echo of footsteps on marble faded as the last board member exited the Harper Foundation conference room. Vivian and Eliza stood in the center of the vast, high-ceilinged space, their breaths heavy from the confrontation that had just unfolded. Despite the tension, a quiet determination settled between them. "You didn't have to stand up for me like that," Vivian said, her voice softer now, almost uncertain. Eliza crossed her arms and gave a small, sardonic smile. "You've been standing up for me. I figured it was my turn." Vivian nodded, gratitude flickering in her expression. "I don't know if it made a difference, but it meant a lot." "It will," Eliza replied, her tone steady. "But now's not the time to let up. They're rattled, but they haven't changed their minds yet." Vivian sighed, running a hand through her carefully styled hair, loosening strands that had been pinned neatly at the start of the meeting. "You're right. This fight is far from over." The door opened, and Clara stepped back inside. Her usually composed demeanor was fraught with tension, and her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached. She stopped short of the pair, her eyes narrowing as they settled on Eliza. "Vivian," Clara began, her tone carefully measured, "a word in private." Vivian looked at Eliza, then back to Clara. "Whatever you have to say, Clara, you can say in front of Eliza." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Very well. The board is meeting informally tonight to discuss contingency plans." "I thought you should know." "Contingency plans," Vivian repeated, her voice carrying an edge. "You mean ways to oust me?" Clara hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "They're concerned about the Foundation's future. They don't think this direction is sustainable." Vivian's expression hardened. "And where do you stand?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Clara looked uncertain. "I've always supported you, Vivian. But I can't ignore the fact that we're at risk of losing everything we've built." What we've built is meaningless if it only benefits the privileged, Vivian snapped, her voice rising. If you're so concerned about protecting the status quo, maybe you're the one who doesn't belong here. Clara's eyes flashed with hurt, but she quickly masked it. I hope you know what you're doing. I do, Vivian said firmly. And I won't back down. Clara gave a curt nod and left, the door closing sharply behind her. Eliza watched her go, then turned to Vivian. That's going to cost you. I know, Vivian said, her voice quieter now, but some costs are worth it. Later that evening, Eliza sat at the community center with Ruth, Mark, and a few others. The room felt heavier than usual, the stakes of their fight looming larger than ever. Mark had been keeping tabs on the fallout from the board meeting, and his updates weren't encouraging. The board is divided, Mark explained, pacing the small space. Some members are pushing to replace Vivian, while others are still on the fence. The donors are playing it safe, waiting to see who comes out on top. Classic, Ruth muttered. They want the power, but not the accountability. Eliza leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table. What can we do? If Vivian gets pushed out, everything we've been fighting for could fall apart. We need to show the board and the donors that public opinion is on Vivian's side, Mark said. The article was a start, but we need more visibility. How? Eliza asked. Rallies, media coverage, social media campaigns, Mark replied. Anything that keeps the pressure on. If the board thinks the public supports Vivian's vision, they'll think twice about going against her. Ruth nodded. It's risky, but it's worth trying. This isn't just about Vivian, it's about changing the system. Eliza glanced around the room, her heart pounding. The thought of taking their fight public on such a large scale was daunting, but she knew it was necessary. Then let's do it. Meanwhile, in her penthouse, Vivian sat alone, the city lights casting a soft glow across the room. She held a glass of wine in one hand and stared out the window, her thoughts racing. Clara's words replayed in her mind, mingling with the faces of the board members, their skepticism and resistance etched deeply. Her phone buzzed, breaking her reverie. It was a text from Eliza. We're organizing a rally. Tomorrow afternoon. You should come. Vivian stared at the message for a moment, then typed a quick reply. I'll be there. The decision felt reckless, but right. If she was going to fight for this cause, she couldn't do it from behind the safety of her office. The next afternoon, a modest crowd gathered in front of the Harper Foundation building. Workers from various industries stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices loud and unified as they held signs demanding justice and fair treatment. Eliza stood at the front, her nerves frayed, but her resolve unshaken. When Vivian arrived, the crowd's energy shifted. Some people cheered, others murmured in surprise, but all eyes were on her as she walked toward Eliza. You came, Eliza said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. I told you I would, Vivian replied. This is as much my fight as it is yours. Eliza nodded, then turned to the crowd, her voice steady despite her nerves. This is Vivian Harper, she said, her words carrying over the noise. She's here because she believes in what we're fighting for. Vivian stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. I'm here because I've been part of the problem, she began, her voice firm but vulnerable. But I want to be part of the solution, and that starts with listening to all of you. The crowd erupted into applause, the sound echoing off the nearby buildings. Eliza glanced at Vivian, a flicker of hope in her eyes. For the first time, it felt like they were truly on the same side, standing together against a system that had long gone unchallenged. As the rally continued, the energy in the air grew electric, a palpable sense of possibility coursing through the crowd. Both women knew the fight was far from over, but in that moment, they stood united, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The crowd had dispersed hours ago, but the echoes of their chants and applause still lingered in Eliza's mind as she stood outside the Harper Foundation building. The rally had been a success, larger than she had anticipated, drawing media attention and even some hesitant smiles from the workers who had come to join. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope that change was possible. Vivian stepped out of the building, her heels clicking softly against the pavement as she approached. The sharp lines of her suit were slightly softened by the fatigue in her posture, but her expression carried a quiet determination. "You did well today," Vivian said, her voice calm but warm. "So did you," Eliza replied, glancing at her. "I didn't expect you to speak." "It felt right," Vivian admitted. "Though I'm sure some of the board members are having heart palpitations right about now," Eliza smirked. "Good, maybe they'll finally get it," Vivian sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "They're stubborn, but today was a step in the right direction." "You really believe that?" Eliza asked, her tone tinged with skepticism. "I have to," Vivian said simply, "because if I don't, what's the point?" Their conversation was interrupted by the buzz of Eliza's phone. She glanced at the screen, her stomach tightening. It was Mark. "Sorry, I need to take this," she said, stepping a few feet away. "Hey, what's up?" Mark's voice was brisk but urgent. "The rally's already making waves, social media's lighting up, and the local news picked it up for the evening segment." "That's good, right?" Eliza asked. "Yes, but there's more," Mark said, his tone shifting. "I just got word that one of the foundation's biggest donors, Samuel Grant, is threatening to pull his funding. He's furious about the rally." Eliza felt her pulse quicken. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the board might use it as leverage to push Vivian out," Mark replied. "You need to be ready for this to escalate." Eliza glanced back at Vivian, who was checking her own phone, her brows furrowed. "We'll figure it out," Eliza said, more to herself than to Mark. "Thanks for letting me know." She hung up and returned to Vivian, who looked up with a faint frown. "Bad news. Mark says one of your donors is pulling out," Eliza said bluntly. Vivian's expression darkened. "Samuel Grant?" Eliza nodded. Vivian sighed, rubbing her temples. "Of course. He's always been more interested in appearances than actual impact." "What are you going to do?" Eliza asked. Vivian's jaw tightened. "I'm not groveling, if that's what you're asking. If Grant can't see the value in what we're trying to achieve, then maybe it's time to let him go." Eliza studied her, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "That's a big risk." "I know," Vivian said, meeting her gaze, "but some risks are worth taking." The following morning, Vivian arrived at the Harper Foundation to find Clara waiting in her office. The tension between them had grown since the board meeting, and today it felt particularly sharp. "Morning, Clara," Vivian said, setting her bag down. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she placed a folder on Vivian's desk and folded her arms. "I assume you've heard about Samuel Grant?" Vivian nodded, taking a seat. "I have." "And?" Clara prompted. "And I'm not changing course," Vivian said firmly. "If Grant wants to leave, that's his choice." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you realize how much his withdrawal will impact our operations? We're already stretched thin. Then we find new sources of funding," Vivian replied. "I won't compromise the integrity of our work to placate him." Clara hesitated, her gaze softening slightly. "Vivian, I've stood by you for years because I believe in what we've built. But this, it feels reckless." Vivian leaned forward, her expression unwavering. "What's reckless is continuing to operate as if everything is fine when it's not." "We can't keep pretending, Clara." The two women stared at each other, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Finally, Clara sighed. "I hope you're right." "So do I," Vivian said quietly. That afternoon, Eliza and Ruth met at the community center to strategize their next steps. The rally had been a success, but the challenges ahead felt more daunting than ever. "You've shaken things up," Ruth said, flipping through a notebook filled with meeting notes and ideas. "Now, the real work begins." "I'm ready," Eliza said, though her voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Ruth looked at her, her expression softening. "You're doing something important, Eliza. Don't lose sight of that." Eliza nodded, though the weight of the fight ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders. "I just wish it didn't feel like it's all on me." "It's not," Ruth said firmly. "You've got people behind you, and Vivian's starting to show she's one of them." "Yeah," Eliza said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "She's not what I expected." "She rarely is," Ruth said with a chuckle, "but that's what makes her valuable." As they finished their discussion, Eliza's phone buzzed with another message from Mark. "Grant's official statement is coming out tomorrow. Be ready for fallout." Eliza sighed, slipping the phone back into her pocket. The ripple effect of their actions was growing, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as she looked around the room filled with people fighting for the same cause, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, she wasn't alone. Vivian spent the evening preparing for the inevitable fallout from Grant's statement. She knew it would be scathing. Grant was nothing if not dramatic, but she also knew she couldn't let it derail their progress. As she reviewed her notes, her phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "No matter what happens, we've got your back." Vivian stared at the message for a moment, a small smile breaking through the tension. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of solidarity she hadn't realized she was missing. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, because this time she wasn't facing it alone. Samuel Grant's statement arrived before sunrise, and its harsh tone reverberated throughout the Harper Foundation like a thunderclap. The wealthy donor accused the foundation of straying from its mission, labeling Vivian's new direction as alienating and politically charged. The language was carefully calculated, designed to sow doubt and stoke division. By mid-morning, the statement had been picked up by multiple news outlets, and the fallout was undeniable. Vivian stood in her office, the open laptop on her desk displaying the statement in bold headlines. She'd read it twice, her emotions shifting from anger to resolve. Clara entered without knocking, her expression unusually tense. "You've seen it, I assume?" Clara said, gesturing toward the screen. "I have," Vivian replied, her tone measured. And it's predictable," Vivian said, closing the laptop. "Grant's protecting his interests." Clara frowned. "Vivian, this could escalate. The board will do what it's always done," Vivian interrupted, her voice sharper now. "But I won't let fear dictate our decisions." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I've scheduled a meeting with the communications team to craft a response. We need to get ahead of this." "I'll handle it," Vivian said, standing. "I need to speak for myself." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's wise?" Vivian met her gaze, her voice firm. "It's necessary." Across the city, Eliza sat in the community center, scrolling through news articles on her phone. Each headline seemed more damning than the last, painting Vivian's stance as reckless and divisive. Ruth sat beside her, flipping through a stack of flyers for their next event. "She's taking a beating," Eliza murmured, more to herself than to Ruth. "That's how it goes when you challenge the status quo," Ruth said without looking up. "They'll try to discredit her, isolate her. Same thing they've done to every disruptor in history." Eliza frowned. "What if it works? What if she folds under the pressure?" Ruth set the flyers down, her gaze steady. "Then it's up to us to make sure she doesn't," Eliza nodded, though the weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Vivian's holding a press conference at noon. You might want to be there." Eliza glanced at Ruth. I need to go. Go, Ruth said, her lips curving into a faint smile. This fight doesn't wait for anyone. By noon, a modest crowd had gathered outside the Harper Foundation building. Journalists with microphones and cameras jostled for position as employees and curious onlookers hovered nearby. Eliza spotted Mark near the edge of the crowd and made her way to him. "She's stepping right into the fire," Mark said, nodding toward the makeshift podium set up on the front steps. "She doesn't have a choice," Eliza replied. "Not if she wants to hold on to any credibility." The murmurs of the crowd quieted as Vivian emerged from the building, her shoulders squared and her expression composed. She stepped up to the podium, scanning the sea of faces before beginning. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I've seen Samuel Grant's statement, and I understand his concerns. But I believe it's important to address the heart of the matter." The cameras clicked incessantly as she continued. The Harper Foundation was created to serve those in need, to provide opportunities and support for people who have been overlooked or undervalued. In recent months, we've begun to take a hard look at the systemic issues that perpetuate inequality. And yes, that includes examining our own practices. Her gaze swept the crowd, her tone growing stronger. "I understand that change can be uncomfortable, but if we are to remain true to our mission, we cannot shy away from difficult conversations or necessary actions." A reporter raised her hand, and Vivian nodded toward her. "Do you believe your new direction alienates the Foundation's core supporters?" the reporter asked. Vivian hesitated, then spoke with conviction. "I believe our core supporters share our commitment to meaningful impact. And I hope they will stand with us as we evolve to better serve those who need us most. But if remaining comfortable means turning a blind eye to injustice, then yes, I'm willing to risk losing some of that support." Eliza felt a surge of admiration as she listened. Vivian's words weren't just calculated, they were genuine, grounded in a truth that resonated deeply. Another reporter spoke up. "What about your critics who say you've politicized the Foundation?" "I reject the notion that advocating for fairness and dignity is political," Vivian said firmly. "This is about humanity, not politics." The press conference continued, Vivian answering each question with a mix of poise and passion. When it ended, the crowd began to disperse, but Eliza stayed. Watching as Vivian stepped away from the podium, she approached her cautiously. "You handled that well." Vivian gave her a tired smile. "Let's hope it's enough." "It will be," Eliza said, her voice steady. "You're doing the right thing." Vivian nodded, her gaze softening. "Thank you, Eliza. I don't think I could do this without you." The words hung between them, carrying a weight that neither woman fully understood. Their alliance, born of conflict and necessity, was becoming something more, a partnership grounded in shared purpose and mutual respect. That evening, Vivian sat in her penthouse, replaying the day's events in her mind. The press conference had been a gamble, and she knew it wouldn't silence all her critics, but it had reaffirmed her commitment, solidifying her resolve to see this fight through. Her phone buzzed with a message from Clara. "The board wants to meet tomorrow. Be prepared." Vivian stared at the message, her jaw tightening. The battle was far from over, but she was ready. Across town, Eliza sat with Liam in their small apartment, scrolling through news coverage of the press conference. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope, not just for Vivian, but for the movement they were building together. "Do you think she'll pull it off?" Liam asked, his tone skeptical but curious. "She has to," Eliza said simply. "Because if she doesn't, everything we've worked for falls apart." The city hummed quietly around them, the weight of their shared fight pressing heavy on their shoulders. But as the night deepened, both women clung to the belief that change, however hard one, was still possible. The boardroom was hushed, the weight of the moment palpable as Vivian stepped inside. The long table was surrounded by faces she knew well, though many of them now carried expressions of unease or outright skepticism. At the far end, Gerald, the senior board member, sat with his hands folded, a faint frown etched into his face. "Vivian," he said as she approached, "thank you for coming." "I didn't think I had a choice," Vivian replied, taking her seat at the head of the table. "You always have a choice," Gerald said, his voice measured. "But we need to discuss the direction the Foundation is taking and its future." Vivian sat straight, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood. "I'm listening." Gerald exchanged a glance with another board member before continuing. "Samuel Grant's statement has created significant unrest among our donors. Several have expressed concerns about whether the Foundation is straying too far from its mission." Vivian tilted her head, her tone sharp but controlled. "Our mission is to help those in need. How exactly am I straying from that?" "It's not about the mission itself," Clara interjected, her voice calm but insistent. "It's about how we execute it. Your recent actions, aligning with controversial figures, hosting rallies, have made some supporters uneasy." "By controversial figures, I assume you mean Eliza Parker," Vivian said, her gaze unwavering. "She's a polarizing figure," Gerald admitted. "Her story has value, but the way it's being used risks alienating the very people who make our work possible." Vivian leaned forward, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "Eliza's story isn't being used. It's a reality we've ignored for too long. If our donors can't handle the truth, then maybe we need to ask ourselves what kind of change we're really making." Gerald sighed, his tone softening. "No one is questioning your commitment, Vivian. But there's a fine line between progress and recklessness. The board is concerned that your approach is jeopardizing the Foundation's long-term stability." "And what do you propose?" Vivian asked, though she already knew the answer. Gerald hesitated, then spoke carefully. "We'd like you to step back from day-to-day operations, at least temporarily, while we assess the situation." Vivian's chest tightened, though her expression remained composed. "You're asking me to step down. We're asking you to consider what's best for the Foundation," Clara said quietly. Vivian looked at her, the sting of betrayal sharp and unexpected. Clara's face was calm, her eyes carefully neutral, but the weight of her words felt heavier than the others. "No," Vivian said firmly. "If you want me out, you'll have to force me out." A murmur rippled through the room, the tension thickening. Gerald sighed, rubbing his temple. "Vivian." "This isn't just about me," Vivian interrupted, her voice rising. "It's about the people we're supposed to serve, the people who have been overlooked and dismissed because it's easier to keep things comfortable for ourselves." The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Gerald spoke, his tone resigned. "We'll reconvene tomorrow to vote on the matter." Vivian stood, her posture tall and defiant. "Do what you have to do." "I'm not backing down." Eliza paced the length of the community center's meeting room, her anxiety palpable. Ruth and Mark sat nearby, watching her with a mix of concern and patience. "You're going to wear out the floor," Ruth said lightly. "I can't just sit here," Eliza replied, her voice tight. "Vivian's in that meeting right now, and it feels like everything's hanging by a thread." "She knows what she's doing," Mark said. "She's handled tougher rooms than this." "Maybe," Eliza said, stopping mid-step, "but this isn't just about her. It's about everything we've been building." "And that's exactly why she won't give up," Ruth said firmly. "Vivian's not the kind of person to let fear dictate her actions. You know that." Eliza nodded, though her worry didn't abate. What if they push her out? What happens then? Then we keep fighting, Ruth said simply. This movement isn't about one person, Eliza. It's bigger than that. The words settled over Eliza, calming her slightly. She resumed pacing, but her steps were slower, more deliberate. Vivian returned to her penthouse late in the evening, her exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. The meeting had drained her, but her resolve remained unbroken. She poured herself a glass of water and sat by the window, the city lights twinkling below. Her phone buzzed with a message from Eliza. How did it go? Vivian hesitated before typing her response. They're voting tomorrow. It's not looking good. The reply came almost instantly. Do you want me there? Vivian smiled faintly, the offer unexpected but oddly comforting. No, this is my fight. But as she set her phone down, she realized it wasn't entirely true. This fight wasn't hers alone, not anymore. The following day, the boardroom was even tenser than before. The members filed in one by one, their expressions guarded. Vivian took her seat, her back straight and her hands steady. She knew the vote would likely go against her, but she was prepared to face the consequences. Before the meeting could begin, the door opened and Eliza stepped inside. The board turned in unison, their surprise evident. Eliza, Vivian said, her voice tinged with disbelief. What are you doing here? I couldn't stay away, Eliza said simply. She looked at the board, her gaze steady. I know I'm not part of this organization, but I need to say something before you vote. Gerald frowned but nodded. Go ahead. Eliza stepped forward, her voice strong despite the nervous flutter in her chest. I know Vivian's made some of you uncomfortable, but that's what change does. It challenges us, pushes us out of our comfort zones. If you push her out now, you're not just silencing her, you're silencing everyone she's been fighting for. The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Vivian watched, a flicker of emotion breaking through her composure. She's not the problem, Eliza continued. She's the solution. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the ones who need to step back. Vivian felt a swell of gratitude as Eliza finished speaking, her presence a powerful reminder of why this fight mattered. Whatever the outcome, Vivian knew she wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. The meeting resumed, but the lines had been drawn more clearly than ever before. The vote loomed, but so did the unyielding determination of two women who refused to back down. The air in the boardroom felt dense, as if the collective tension of its occupants had thickened the very atmosphere. Vivian sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, betraying none of the storm raging within. To her left, Clara avoided eye contact, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Across the table, Gerald, the senior board member, cleared his throat, signaling the meeting's start. This is a difficult day for all of us, Gerald began, his tone heavy. But the role of this board is to safeguard the foundation and ensure its ability to fulfill its mission. Vivian's lips tightened, but she remained silent. She knew better than to interrupt a speech designed to soften the blow of what was coming. Gerald continued, We've all seen the impact of recent events, the rallies, the donor withdrawals, the public discourse. While these have brought attention to important issues, they've also put the foundation's stability at risk. It's our responsibility to decide how best to move forward. The other board members nodded, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to resolute. Eliza, seated near the back of the room, crossed her arms and leaned forward, her face a portrait of defiance. I've heard your concerns, Vivian said, her voice cutting through the silence that followed Gerald's words. But let's not forget what we're here for. Stability means nothing if it comes at the cost of our integrity. Integrity doesn't keep the lights on, Clara interjected, her tone measured but firm. "Without funding, we can't do anything for the people we claim to help." Vivian turned to Clara, her voice calm but edged with steel. "And what's the cost of keeping that funding? Turning our backs on the people who need us most? Prioritizing comfort over justice." Clara didn't respond immediately, her lips pressing into a thin line. Gerald held up a hand, his expression diplomatic. "Let's keep this constructive. We're here to vote on whether Vivian should step back from her role as CEO while we reassess the Foundation's direction." The words hung in the air, their finality slicing through the room. Vivian looked around the table, reading the faces of her colleagues. Some avoided her gaze, others met it with varying degrees of regret or resolve. "I'd like to say one more thing before we vote," Eliza said, standing abruptly. Gerald frowned but gestured for her to proceed. "Go ahead." Eliza stepped forward, her voice strong despite the nerves she felt. "I'm not here as a board member or a donor or a stakeholder. I'm here as someone who's lived through the consequences of your choices. You say you want stability, but stability for who? For the donors who want to feel good about writing a check, for the board members who get to tout their philanthropy at fancy dinners." Her words cut through the room, sharp and unrelenting. "Stability isn't what the people you're supposed to be helping need. They need change, real, uncomfortable, messy change, and Vivian's the only one here willing to fight for it." A ripple of unease passed through the board. Gerald shifted in his seat, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for your perspective, Ms. Parker." Eliza glared at him but stepped back, her point made. Vivian glanced at her, a flicker of gratitude passing through her eyes before she turned back to the board. "Let's vote." Gerald nodded. "All in favor of the proposal to temporarily remove Vivian Harper as CEO, please raise your hand." The room fell into a tense silence as hands rose, one after another. Clara was among them, her face expressionless as she lifted her hand. Vivian felt a sharp pang but didn't let it show. When the count was complete, Gerald turned to the others. "All opposed?" A smaller number of hands went up, their owners glancing around the table with a mix of defiance and trepidation. "The motion passes," Gerald said, his tone heavy. "Vivian, effective immediately. You will step back from your duties as CEO. Clara will serve as interim CEO while the board evaluates next steps." Vivian nodded, her face a mask of calm. "Understood." The meeting adjourned soon after, the board members filtering out with hurried steps and quiet conversations. Eliza stayed behind, watching as Vivian remained seated, staring at the table. "Vivian," Eliza said, her voice soft. Vivian looked up, her composure cracking just slightly. "Well, that's that. They're wrong," Eliza said firmly, "and you know it." "Knowing doesn't make it easier," Vivian replied with a wry smile. She stood, smoothing her blazer as she straightened. "But this fight isn't over, not by a long shot." "What's your next move?" Eliza asked. Vivian's gaze hardened, her determination unmistakable. "They may have taken my title, but they haven't taken my voice, and I'm going to use it." Eliza nodded, admiration flickering in her expression. "Then let's get to work." Later that evening, Vivian met with a small group of her closest allies, including Eliza, Ruth, and Mark. They gathered in the quiet of Vivian's penthouse, the city lights casting a warm glow across the room. "They think they've silenced me," Vivian said, pacing as she spoke. "But this is bigger than the Harper Foundation. If they won't stand with us, we'll find others who will." "We'll need to be strategic," Mark said. "Public support is growing, but we can't lose momentum." "And we won't," Ruth said, her voice steady. "This isn't just about one foundation. It's about exposing the whole system for what it is." Vivian nodded, her resolve hardening with every word. "Then we fight, together." As the group discussed their plans, the weight of the day began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose that burned brighter than ever. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but none of them were backing down. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, they felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would take on the system, and this time, they wouldn't stop until they won. The tension in the room was palpable as Vivian, Eliza, Ruth, and Mark sat around the low coffee table in Vivian's penthouse. The city's lights twinkled behind them, a stark contrast to the heavy discussion taking place. Papers and notes were scattered across the table, along with half-empty coffee cups and an untouched plate of sandwiches that Ruth had brought. "We need to broaden the reach of this movement," Ruth said, her voice steady but firm. "The Harper Foundation's board may have sidelined you, but they can't control the narrative if we don't let them." Vivian nodded, though the sting of her removal as CEO was still fresh. "We can't let them frame this as a failure. If we lose the public's support, the board will feel justified in walking everything back." Eliza leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "What about the workers? The people who came to the rally? Can we bring them into this? If they share their stories, it'll be harder for the board to spin this as just a PR problem." Mark tapped his pen against his notepad, nodding thoughtfully. "It's a good idea. Personal stories resonate, especially when they're tied to a larger issue. But we have to be careful. We're asking people to put themselves out there, and that comes with risks." "I'll talk to them," Eliza said. "If they're willing, I'll make sure they understand what's at stake." Vivian watched her, a flicker of admiration passing through her eyes. "You're fearless. You know that." Eliza shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I'm tired of being afraid." The following day, Eliza met with a small group of workers at the community center. Some had attended the rally, while others were hearing about the movement for the first time. She stood at the front of the room, her nerves crackling beneath her calm exterior. "Most of you know my story," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of their gazes. "I've been where you are, working long hours for little pay, treated like I was invisible. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us." The room was silent, the workers listening intently. Carlos, the janitor who had become a vocal supporter of the movement, raised his hand. "What happens if we speak out and it backfires?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Some of us can't afford to lose our jobs." Eliza nodded, acknowledging his fear. "I won't lie to you. There are risks, but there's power in numbers. If we stand together, it's harder for them to ignore us or punish us." A younger woman, Mia, spoke up next. "What if they don't listen? What if we do all this and nothing changes?" Eliza looked at her, her expression softening. "Then at least we'll know we tried, and sometimes just trying is enough to spark something bigger." The room fell quiet again, the weight of her words settling over the group. Slowly, hands began to rise, workers willing to share their stories, to lend their voices to a fight that was no longer just Eliza's. Meanwhile, at the Harper Foundation, Clara sat in her office, scrolling through emails with a furrowed brow. The board's decision to make her interim CEO had put her in an awkward position. She respected Vivian's vision, but the pressure from donors and stakeholders was relentless. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Gerald stepped inside, his expression neutral but his tone clipped. "We need to talk about damage control," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Vivian's press conference may have stirred public support, but the backlash from donors is escalating." "Samuel Grant has been rallying others behind the scenes." Clara leaned back, her exhaustion evident. "What do you suggest?" Gerald's gaze hardened. "We distance ourselves from her completely, issue a statement reinforcing the Foundation's commitment to neutrality and emphasizing that Vivian no longer speaks for us." Clara hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "That might placate the donors, but it'll alienate the public. We could lose more support than we gain. Then what's your alternative? Gerald asked, his tone sharp. Clara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared out the window, her thoughts a swirl of loyalty, pragmatism, and doubt. Let me think about it. That evening, Eliza and Vivian met at a small diner on the edge of the city, far from the polished halls of the Harper Foundation. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fried food, and the soft hum of conversation provided a comforting backdrop. "How did it go with the workers?" Vivian asked as she stirred her tea. "Better than I expected," Eliza said, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. "A lot of them are scared, but some are willing to speak out." Vivian nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's a start, and it's more than we had yesterday." Eliza hesitated, then leaned forward. "How are you holding up, really?" Vivian blinked, surprised by the question. "I'm fine." "Vivian," Eliza said, her tone gentle but firm. "You don't have to pretend with me." Vivian sighed, setting her spoon down. "I feel untethered. Like everything I've worked for is slipping away, but I also feel more certain than ever that I'm doing the right thing." "You are," Eliza said without hesitation. "And you're not alone in this." "We've got your back." Vivian smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth breaking through her fatigue. "Thank you, Eliza. That means more than you know." As they left the diner, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement, both women felt the quiet strength of their partnership. The fight ahead was daunting, but together they were determined to face it, one step at a time. The first video surfaced on a cloudy Thursday morning. It was raw and unpolished, filmed on a worker's phone, but the voice behind it carried a weight that no amount of production value could replicate. "I'm Carlos," the janitor began, standing in his break room with a mop and bucket behind him. His eyes were tired but resolute. "I've been cleaning this building for 10 years. I've worked double shifts, missed family events, and been treated like I'm invisible. But I'm not invisible. None of us are." Eliza watched the video on her phone, a knot tightening in her chest. Carlos had been one of the first to raise his hand at the community center, but seeing him speak so candidly made her realize the enormity of what they were building. By noon, more videos had begun to circulate. Mia, the young waitress, shared her story of balancing impossible schedules while trying to finish college. Denise, a caregiver, spoke of the emotional toll of her work and the lack of recognition it received. Each story was unique, but they all echoed the same refrain: "We deserve better." The videos gained traction online, shared and reshared until they began to dominate the local conversation. Hashtags like "Reason and Dignity for All" and "Invisible No More" trended, and comments poured in from workers, advocates, and supporters alike. Eliza was in the community center when Ruth approached her, a rare smile on her face. "You started something big, kid." Eliza shook her head. "We all did." Ruth chuckled. "Don't be modest. It takes guts to do what you're doing." Eliza sighed, looking around the bustling room. "It's just, I didn't expect it to get this big so fast." "That's the thing about change," Ruth said. "Once the spark's lit, it spreads like wildfire." Meanwhile, Vivian sat in her penthouse, scrolling through the videos on her laptop. Each one hit her like a wave, the raw honesty of the workers' voices cutting through her polished world. She felt a deep sense of pride mixed with a pang of guilt, pride for being part of the movement, guilt for not seeing these stories earlier. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from Clara. "We need to talk." Vivian frowned, hesitating before typing a reply. "About what?" Clara's response came quickly. "The board wants to issue a formal statement distancing the foundation from the workers' campaign." Vivian's chest tightened, anger flaring. She typed back, her fingers moving swiftly. "I'm not surprised." "Tell them I'll be issuing my own statement." The reply was immediate. "Vivian, This isn't the time for defiance. Think about what you're risking." Vivian stared at the screen, her jaw clenching. After a moment, she set the phone down and returned to the videos. The stories weren't just powerful, they were a reminder of why she had taken this fight on in the first place. By evening, the community center was buzzing with activity. Workers and volunteers were finalizing plans for a large rally scheduled for the weekend, while Mark coordinated media outreach. Eliza moved through the room, answering questions and offering encouragement, though the weight of the growing movement pressed heavily on her shoulders. Mark approached her, holding a clipboard. "The rally's shaping up to be bigger than we anticipated. The city's already issued permits, but we're going to need more volunteers for crowd management." "I'll find some," Eliza said, scanning the room. "What about media coverage?" Mark nodded. "We've got 3 local outlets confirmed and interest from a national one. If the rally goes well, it could take this to a whole new level." "That's a good thing, right?" Eliza asked, though doubt crept into her voice. "It's a great thing," Mark said. "But it also means more scrutiny. Be ready for that." Eliza nodded, though her nerves tightened. She spotted Carlos across the room and made her way over. "Carlos," she said, her voice warm, "your video was incredible." He smiled sheepishly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't think anyone would care." "People care," Eliza said firmly, "and because of you, more people are speaking out." Carlos nodded, his expression turning serious. "I just hope it makes a difference." "It will," Eliza said, though she couldn't ignore the weight of his hope pressing against her own doubts. That night, Vivian joined Eliza and Ruth at a small diner to discuss the rally. The 3 women sat in a corner booth, the hum of conversation around them providing a comforting backdrop. "This rally could be a turning point," Vivian said, stirring her tea absently. "But it could also provoke more backlash." "Let them push back," Ruth said, her tone resolute. "It'll only prove we're getting to them." "Eliza, how are you feeling about it?" Vivian asked, her gaze softening as she looked at her. Eliza hesitated, then shrugged. "Honestly, terrified. But I've been terrified since the article came out. At this point, I'm kind of used to it." Vivian smiled faintly. "Fear means you're doing something that matters." "Easy for you to say," Eliza replied, her tone teasing but laced with genuine affection. Vivian chuckled. "Fair point." Ruth leaned forward, her expression serious. "Listen, the bigger this gets, the harder they'll fight back, but don't let that shake you. Movements like this are built on perseverance." "I won't," Eliza said, her voice steady. "We've come too far to stop now." As the city settled into the quiet hum of night, the seeds of change continued to take root. The rally loomed large on the horizon, a moment that could define the movement and the lives of everyone involved. In their separate corners of the city, Vivian and Eliza prepared for what lay ahead, their determination burning brighter than ever. They were no longer just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a future that finally felt within reach. The air was crisp on the morning of the rally, carrying with it the promise of change and the tension of uncertainty. Eliza arrived at the designated park early, the city's skyline looming in the background like a silent witness to the movement unfolding beneath it. Volunteers were setting up the stage and arranging chairs for speakers, while others handed out signs emblazoned with slogans like "Dignity for All" and "We See You." Mark was already there, clipboard in hand and a phone pressed to his ear. He waved Eliza over as he hung up. "We're expecting a bigger turnout than planned," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "City officials are on edge, but they're not shutting us down." "That's something," Eliza replied, adjusting her scarf against the chill. "How's the media response?" "Good," Mark said. 3 local stations are sending reporters, and the national outlet confirmed they'll have a team here. This is the kind of visibility we've been waiting for." Eliza nodded, her chest tightening with equal parts anticipation and anxiety. "Let's hope it makes a difference." "It already is," Mark said, his gaze steady. "You've done something incredible, Eliza. Don't forget that." By mid-morning, the park was alive with energy. Workers from all walks of life filled the space, holding signs and chanting slogans that grew louder as more people joined. Families with young children mingled with retirees, and college students stood shoulder to shoulder with blue-collar workers. The diversity of the crowd was a testament to the movement's reach, a visual representation of the solidarity that had begun to take root. Vivian arrived just before the speeches were set to begin, her presence drawing murmurs from the crowd. She wore a simple black coat, her usual polished demeanor softened by a rare hint of vulnerability. Eliza spotted her and made her way through the throng of people. "You came," Eliza said, her voice carrying relief. "Of course I did," Vivian replied, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "This is bigger than any of us now." Eliza smiled faintly. "It feels overwhelming." Vivian placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression gentle but firm. "It's supposed to. Movements like this don't happen without a little chaos." Before Eliza could respond, Ruth approached, holding a clipboard and wearing her usual no-nonsense expression. "You two ready? The media's waiting, and the first speakers are lined up." Vivian nodded, her composure slipping back into place. "Let's do this." The rally began with speeches from workers who had shared their stories online. Carlos took the stage first, his voice steady as he recounted years of feeling invisible and undervalued. Mia followed, her words resonating with the younger members of the crowd as she spoke about balancing school, work, and dreams that often felt out of reach. When it was Eliza's turn, she stepped onto the stage, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The crowd quieted, their collective gaze fixed on her. She gripped the edges of the podium, taking a steadying breath. "Most of you know my story," she began, her voice clear despite the nerves thrumming beneath it. "I've spent years working jobs where I felt like I didn't matter, where I was treated like I didn't matter. But today, standing here with all of you, I know that's not true. We matter, every single one of us." The crowd erupted into applause, the sound swelling and enveloping her. Eliza continued, her confidence growing. "This isn't just about wages or working conditions, though those things are important. It's about being seen, being valued, being treated like human beings." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And we're not going to stop until that happens." The crowd roared, their chants of "We see you" echoing through the park. Eliza stepped back from the podium, her chest heaving with emotion. Vivian met her at the base of the stage, her expression one of quiet pride. "You were amazing," Vivian said. Eliza shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "It's not just me, it's all of us." Vivian nodded, her gaze turning toward the crowd. "You're right. And this is only the beginning." As the rally continued, the energy in the park remained electric. Reporters moved through the crowd, interviewing attendees and capturing footage of the signs and speeches. Ruth stood near the media section, watching the coverage unfold with a satisfied expression. "It's happening," she said to Mark, who stood beside her. "People are finally paying attention." "They are," Mark agreed. "But the real test comes after this." "The system isn't going to change without a fight," Ruth smirked. "Good thing we've got fighters." Toward the end of the rally, Vivian took the stage. The crowd quieted as she approached the podium, their anticipation palpable. She adjusted the microphone, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "Today, I stand not as a leader of a foundation or a figure of privilege, but as someone who believes in the power of people, ordinary people, demanding extraordinary change." She paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. I've spent years building a foundation that I thought was helping. But the truth is, I wasn't listening. People like Eliza Parker showed me what I couldn't see on my own, and for that, I am deeply grateful." The crowd murmured, their attention rapt. Vivian's voice grew stronger as she continued, "The Harper Foundation Board may have sidelined me, but they haven't silenced me, and they won't silence us. Together, we can build something better, something that sees and values every person." The applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that seemed to ripple through the city itself. As Vivian stepped back, Eliza joined her, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. This was their fight, and they were far from finished. Together they had lit a fire that was spreading faster than anyone had anticipated, and as they looked out at the crowd, thousands of voices raised in unison, they knew the movement they had built was unstoppable. The rally's success was undeniable. By the following morning, news outlets and social media were flooded with images of the diverse crowd, the passionate speeches, and the unifying chants. Eliza's face, captured mid-speech, had become the rally's unofficial symbol, her words resonating far beyond the park where they had been spoken. But with the visibility came consequences. Eliza sat in the quiet of her apartment, scrolling through the comments on one of the rally videos. For every message of support, there was another filled with vitriol, accusations of laziness, entitlement, and even threats. She dropped her phone onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Liam walked in, a steaming mug of coffee in each hand. "You're doing it again," he said, setting one mug in front of her. "Doing what?" Eliza asked, her voice muffled. "Letting the trolls get to you," he said, sitting beside her. "You knew this was going to happen." "Knowing doesn't make it easier," she muttered. "Some of the things they're saying. It's like they don't see us as people." Liam nudged her gently. "You've got more supporters than haters, Eliza. And the people who matter, they're listening. Don't lose sight of that." Eliza looked at him, her expression softening. "Thanks, Liam. I don't say it enough, but I couldn't do this without you." He grinned, raising his mug in a mock toast. "That's what I'm here for." At the Harper Foundation, the backlash was taking a different form. Clara sat in her office, poring over emails from donors and board members, many of whom were furious about the rally and Vivian's role in it. The Foundation's public relations team had drafted a statement distancing the organization from the movement, but Clara hesitated to approve it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Gerald, his expression as stern as ever. "Clara," he began, stepping inside. "Have you seen the latest donor withdrawal figures?" "I have," she replied, gesturing toward the papers on her desk. "This can't continue," Gerald said, his tone sharp. "We need to issue that statement immediately." Clara folded her hands, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not sure that's the right move." Gerald's brow furrowed. "Not the right move? Clara, this foundation is bleeding support. If we don't take a clear stance, we risk losing everything. Taking a stance could alienate even more people," Clara countered, "and issuing a statement against the movement risks irreparable damage to our reputation with the public." Gerald stared at her, his jaw tightening. "Do you think Vivian Harper cares about the Foundation's reputation?" Clara hesitated, her loyalty to Vivian clashing with her pragmatic instincts. "Vivian cares about making a difference. That's what this foundation was built for. And if we can't make a difference because we've lost all our funding," Gerald pressed. Clara sighed, rubbing her temple. "Let me think about it." Vivian sat in a modest coffee shop across town, meeting with Ruth and Mark to plan their next steps. The rally had been a triumph, but they knew the backlash would only intensify. "The media coverage is mostly positive," Mark reported, scrolling through his phone. "But the pushback from corporate interests is ramping up. A few businesses are already lobbying city officials to limit permits for future rallies. Ruth snorted. Of course they are. Nothing scares the powerful like a bunch of workers finding their voice. Vivian sipped her coffee, her expression thoughtful. We need to be ready for their next move. They'll try to discredit us, make it seem like this is just a flash in the pan. Mark nodded. We need to show them this isn't going away. More stories, more events, and more visibility. I'll start reaching out to the workers who've already come forward, Ruth said. See if they're willing to do interviews or speak at future rallies. Vivian turned to Mark, and I'll work on leveraging the media coverage. If we can get national outlets to pick this up, it'll be harder for them to dismiss us. As they finalized their plans, Vivian's phone buzzed with a message from Clara. Call me when you can. It's important. She frowned, showing the message to Ruth and Mark. This can't be good. Could be nothing, Ruth said, or it could be the board trying to tighten the noose. Vivian sighed. I'll handle it. They're not silencing me, no matter what they try. Eliza spent the afternoon at the community center meeting with workers who were eager to join the movement. The energy in the room was electric, but Eliza couldn't shake the lingering unease from the threats she'd received online. She knew the stakes were high, but the weight of leading this charge was beginning to wear on her. Carlos approached her during a break, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by concern. You okay, Eliza? She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just everything feels so big, you know, like it's all on me. It's not, Carlos said firmly. We're all in this together. You've inspired us, but this isn't just your fight. Eliza smiled faintly. Thanks, Carlos. I needed to hear that. That evening, Vivian called Clara from her penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across the room. Clara's voice was tense when she answered. The board is pressuring me to issue a statement distancing the foundation from the rally, Clara said without preamble. Vivian's grip tightened on the phone. And what did you tell them? I told them I needed more time to think, Clara replied. But they're not going to wait forever. Vivian exhaled, her voice steady but edged with frustration. Clara, if you give them that statement, you'll undermine everything we're fighting for. I know, Clara said quietly. But if I don't, they might push me out too. Then let them, Vivian said. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything. The line went silent for a moment before Clara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try to hold the line. As Vivian ended the call, she felt a mix of anger and resolve. The board was tightening its grip, but the movement was gaining strength. The fight ahead would be brutal, but she and Eliza were ready to face it together. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.